time we did it.
That's how they're made, unless they're burning.
I've got lots of TV coverage here. Go ahead, put it there.
Frame.
My mom was a cottage in Dundee.
You're not getting the glare off this, right?
Congrats, Mac.
Dinner.
Two flowers.
It's okay, we're gonna burn them. Like, that's better. That's better.
Welcome, everybody.
The agendas are too heavy.
Let's all stand for a moment of personal reflection. Thank you. We have a special treat tonight. The national anthem will be sung by Ms. Heather Gollinger. If you can come forward. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command, car ton bras se porter l'épée, il s'est porté la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. To sign the book. So, this wonderful singer holds an honors degree in music, voice from Bishop's University, and is the vocal music teacher at CCVS. She has performed in various lead roles with the community Seaway Valley Theatre Company, as a soloist in local churches, wedding ceremonies, community events, private functions, and now City Council. So thank you very much. That was
Our
beautiful.
way up.
Merci. All right.
Madam Mayor?
Oh, yes. Councillor Elaine McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would just like to add, Heather will be performing for the community again at the Arts Hall of Fame Gala on October the 18th at the Best Western. She's going to have a very special place in the program and sing a very special song.
Thank you for highlighting that. So we acknowledge that we are gathering on the traditional territory of the Mohawk people of Akwesasne. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Mayor Bernadette Clement,
Présente.
Councillors Claude McIntosh,
Présent.
Elaine McDonald,
Present?
Sid Gardner,
Ici.
Dean Hollingsworth,
Present.
Caroline Neval,
Présent.
Councillors Modeste Dupel,
Present.
Glenn Grant,
Present.
Todd Bennett,
Present.
Justin Towndale,
Present.
and Derek Bergeron.
Présent. Oh, it's here.
Any additions, deletions, or amendments? Madam Clerk, do you have any?
I have none, Madam Mayor.
All right. Adoption of the agenda. Councillor Grant. Councillor McIntosh. Any comments, questions? All in favor? Thank you. Any disclosure of interest? Councillor Bergeron.
Yes. In the municipal grants item,
Madam Clerk?
organization I work for receives funding through municipal grants.
Motion to go into committee of the whole. Councillor Gardner, Councillor McDonald, all in favor? Carried. Adoption of the minutes, we have 2 meetings, August 12 and August 26, 2019. Moved by Councillor DePel, seconded by Councillor Bennett. Any discussion, changes? All in favor? Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Our first presentation this evening is recognizing Jeff Lalonde for the Sovereign Medal recipient. And we have Deputy Chief Sport to introduce him.
Constable Lalonde. Come on up.
Your Worship, City Council members, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come and present to you today a member of the Cornwall Police Service that we are very, very proud of. I'd like to tell you a little bit about him before we present. So Constable Jeff Lalonde has been employed with the Cornwall Police Service since 1999, recently reaching his 20th anniversary with us. Constable Lalonde has worked in Community Patrol Divisions, the Forensic Identification Unit, Criminal Investigation Division, Crime Prevention, and Community Partnerships. Jeff has spent his time serving the community not only as a police officer, but also through fundraising activities for local soccer clubs, spearheading the Tasers versus Blazers event, which raised over $40,000 for Blazers youth soccer programs. Perhaps Jeff is best known in the community for his work that he and his wife, Sherry, have dedicated to the success of the Crafting a Cure event, raising money for Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. Crafting a Cure was created by Jeff and Sherry in 2013 and has raised $102,000. Constable Jeff Lalonde was recognized for his exceptional volunteer achievements by receiving the Sovereign Medal for Volunteers. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Constable Jeff Lalonde.
So we'd like you to sign the book and then maybe just say a few words for us, if you may.
I don't really know what to say. I'm born and raised in Cornwall. I've raised my children here, live here, work here. I love the city, and I'll continue to volunteer till the day they put me in the ground. I love our community, and everything I can do for it, I definitely will continue doing. So, thank you very much for this honor. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Go ahead and sign. Constable Lalonde, we want to thank you. There are very few people that don't know who you are or that haven't been touched somehow by the work that you and Sherry have done in this community. Thank you for being here, Sherry. I know you're humble. I know that this is not easy to stand here and take the praise, but you are quite a community builder, and we are very grateful to you. So thank you. Merci. Madam Clerk?
Our next presentation is to Linda Lou Phillips, who is the recipient of Best of Show in Focus Art Annual Juried Exhibition. And we have Councillor Elaine McDonald who will introduce her.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Ms. Clerk. I'm pleased and honored to introduce to you today Linda Lou Phillips, who is a human dynamo. Linda is an artist, and I think you probably recognize, having seen this picture, which is the picture that earned her the Best of Show nomination in the Messina Art Show. You probably saw it hanging in the hall outside during I think June and July and August. It hung there, and it's an utterly beautiful piece of work. As you can see, it's in realistic style. It's very extremely detailed and very warm, and warm colors are typical of Linda's art. Linda is a sculptor as well as a painter. Now, Linda has been very actively involved in art administration too. She served as president of Focus Art, which is a huge organization of artists in Cornwall. And since retiring from the presidency, she has been very actively involved. She's continued to mentor other artists and be part of the organization and their monthly meetings and so on. But she also has an international reputation, having won the Best of Show with this picture in the Messina Cornwall Art Contest that happens every year. And Linda was extremely honored after she won the Best of Show, and I think she actually got the title, Artist of the Year for 2019. She was invited by the school boards, the complex, the multiple school boards of Messina, to participate as a judge in their end-of-year art shows from kindergarten on up to graduation. And that was a really singular honor that the community of Messina awarded Linda. So she's a pretty valuable member of our community too, and we just shared you. You can't go over there. And I guess I just want to end on this note. The next award's going to be with reference to the business association that we're building with Messina, Cornwall and Messina. And I want you to know that this artists organization, this collaboration and friendly competition that we've had going with Messina for a number of years now is part of the artists' response and their contribution to building the bridge between our community and our American neighbor. And I think you've been at it a lot longer than our Economic Development Department officially. So Linda, thanks a lot. And congratulations. So we'd like to invite you up to sign the Book of Recognition.
May I just say a short word?
You absolutely may.
Thank you. About 5 years ago, we were looking for a place to live. We found it was too cold to live in our motorhome. So we were looking for a place to live. We've been pretty well around the world. We've traveled a lot. We've lived in 14 different houses in many cities. And one day we decided to come up Highway 2 east. And I fell absolutely madly in love with this city. Of all the beautiful places we've seen in our travels, there is something in this city that is so special. And I know people who listen to me, they don't get a word in, but anyway, who listen to me, they don't believe me. But there is something here. There is such a promise in this city if people would just get together, work together, and see the beauty and the promise in this city. And I am so, so thankful that we are part of it.
Thank you. I will agree with Councillor MacDonald that you are a human dynamo. And I have heard you tell that beautiful story before. She is a great advertisement for Choose Cornwall.
That's right.
And she does it here in the council chambers, but she does it pretty much everywhere she goes. I have been a witness to that. So I thank you for choosing Cornwall and for sharing all of the artistic talent and the work. That's important too, and we appreciate it. So thank you.
It's
wish
my
your
pleasure.
guests a safe trip, travels. They're here from England.
Yes, they are.
Yes.
They arrived just on time for this.
That's perfect.
Thank you.
So we welcome you as well to Cornwall and wish you well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the Cross-Border Partnership Program by Simon McClendon, Project Manager at the Cornwall and the County's Community Futures Development Corporation.
So, Simon McClendon looks a little different tonight. It's actually Ms. Leslie Lang Thompson who's here. And Mr. McClendon,
He had a good
dad,
excuse.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They welcomed a new baby to the world at 9 a.m. this morning, so his wife wouldn't let him get away for this.
that's all good. We're happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. So thank you for welcoming me to the to present to you this evening the Cross-Border Partnership Program. My name is Leslie Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Futures Development Corporation. I know that a lot of you know the Community Futures Development Corporation, but not so intimately the projects that we have that we administer. So we want to get a little bit, help you become a little bit more informed about one of those particular projects today. I'm going to provide you just an overview, some additional information, and hope to encourage more dialogue after the fact. Of course, open for questions at the end, but we really want to have more back and forth with our councillors and our mayor about this program. It's been going on for almost 3 years now, and it's only growing in size and impact. So I'll first remind you the mission of the CFDC itself. I'll talk a little bit about some of the goals of the Cross-Border Partnership Program, how we go about achieving them, some successes. I'll cover some of the partners, not all because there's a lot, how we help this community and other communities that surround it, and then what we see as next. The CFDC's mission is to act as a catalyst, a leader, and a partner for a sustainable and growing economy that builds on the assets that Akwesasne, Cornwall, and SDG have to offer. We do this through the administration of 4 separate pillars: lending, business support, strategic community planning, and community economic development. The Cross-Border Partnership Program falls under our community economic development pillar. So you might recall about 2016, there was a big meeting at the Turtle Dome. I think maybe Elaine, you were there at that time. There was a few other, Justin was there too, a few other councillors that partook in a meeting to, I think it was brought about by the chambers, so the local chambers. There was just an appetite to collaborate better together. So we started off by just getting in a room together and just having that first conversation. And we came up as a group with some very exciting collaborative projects that everyone would love to see happen. And we met again, and we talked again, and then we realized there was no one that could actually action any of these projects. Everyone's at full capacity within their own respective responsibilities, and the CFDC took it upon ourselves to submit an application to be that person who could action these great ideas that the regions as a whole, Akwesasne, the counties, and Cornwall, came up with. So we were successful in receiving 2 years funding through FedDev, and with that we began to formulate our plan to help the communities work better regionally, and here we are today. So I have to admit that we didn't start this alone. I did this in close partnership with very close partnership with the man I ended up becoming engaged to. So I got to give a shout out to Christopher Thompson. He was the economic development, the director of economic development for the St. Regis Mohawk tribe. So this project certainly near and dear to my heart, because it was something that that we really established together with the support of the CFDC. So I'll get a little bit into our goals. And I want to make sure that I remind everyone that these are not our goals. These are actually the goals that everyone around the table that day said that they wanted to see happen in this region. The mandate of the Cross-Border Partnership Program is that we are stronger together. That essentially sums it up. That's our tagline. The goal of the Cross-Border Partnership Program is to strengthen the relationships both economically and culturally between Akwesasne and the municipalities that surround it. We do this through a 3-phase approach: connect, plan, and act. Ultimately, we try to be a go-to party for anything that is related to joint ventures, introduction, business development, funding, relationship building, government relations. We want to be the people who you can use for anything that you might not have the capacity to do yourself with regards to relationship building across communities, whether that be across Cornwall and Akwesasne, Akwesasne and Messina, SDG and Akwesasne. So we help to be the voice and the connector for Akwesasne and the municipalities that surround it. Some of the goals of the program include that of education. We want to help educate as many people as possible on the complexities of Akwesasne as a territory, particularly around the border, the toll booth, the bi-national locations. We want to improve access to funding opportunities for Akwesasne businesses. One of the number one goals of the project is to bridge the skills gap. One of our bigger goals is getting as many frontline workers from Akwesasne into positions that need filling in Cornwall in particular. There's a big disconnect with the unemployment rate in Akwesasne currently and the unemployment rate in Cornwall, and I don't think I need to go into detail about that. We're all well aware of this difficult problem that we're trying to find ways around today. Connecting is a big part of it, helping foster connections that grow the region collectively while being respectful of one another's operational capacities and cultural differences. So enhancing the community-community relationships. We want to help build a more attractive climate for investment and tourism, a stronger, more unified voice with the federal and provincial governments, more efficient use of the limited resources that we do all have, more possibilities to address the regional land use planning challenges and opportunities, and access to each partner's unique human, physical, and financial capabilities, and alternative funding streams that we can all tap into and partner on. So I think realizing I'm limited on time, I'm going to skip quickly past the how-tos, but very willing and able to get into those with anyone should they desire. I want to talk about our successes because we have, this program's been almost 3 years now. We're going on our 3rd year. We don't have the marketing budget, so we see this as an opportunity to come here and talk about the good things that we've been able to do and the highlight we've been able to bring on this community because of this program. And I think everyone's certainly feeling the shift in mindset about working with our First Nation neighbors. This council specifically has made some really big leaps comparatively, and we want to congratulate the council. I know, Elaine, it was a good, fantastic suggestion by you. A little bit goes a long way just to show respect and engagement. So the Mohawk language on signage, it might seem like a little thing, but it goes a long way in really showing respect and building the relationships and paving a more solid path to walk down in the future. So a little bit about our successes. We hosted and funded an executive leadership session attended by leaders from Cornwall, Akwesasne, and the counties. This was one of the first things we did, and it was just an act of saying, this is the program, we want to do this for you, we're not asking for anything, we just want to get people around the table, provide a value add, and start the conversation. We helped coordinate the first Akwesasne Business Expo. We hosted the Regional Economic Renewal Summit, which was an open discussion facilitation session where representatives from our region could have their opinions on strategic priorities for the prospective communities, but with more of a regional approach and outlook. We successfully helped get the first representative from Akwesasne onto the Regional Agri-Food Network, which Carolyn, you're quite familiar with, along with making sure that we had representation from Akwesasne on our board. And we try and promote more of this, cross collaboration of people from the entire region on all of the boards that end up making the decisions and focusing on the different priorities of the regions. We hosted and funded the 2nd and 3rd cross-border meet and greet, attended by over 100 people. I know a lot of you were in attendance to many of those as well. We facilitated the 2nd roundtable meeting with representatives from all communities. We have been the first call when there's been issues between Akwesasne and our business community, as they've arisen more often than they should, and these are small issues that could have gotten quite large if it wasn't for connecting the right people and being sensitive to one another's history. We hosted multiple education settings at Small Business Week in Cornwall, where attendees received presentations from Akwesasne community members on how to do business with Akwesasne and some of the challenges facing people living in the community. So again, along that education front, we were successful in applying for a MAFRA funding to conduct a study which supports the with data supports the evidence for working together as a region on tourism. We helped to create the Tri-Chamber Alliance, and this Tri-Chamber Alliance was one of the most successful things that the cross-border partnerships helped facilitate. In fact, we were successful in winning a number of awards for this program. Even Simon jokes about it. He would if he was here. We were invited to participate on a panel of experts in cross-border relationships in Buffalo in 2018. The Economic Development Corporations of Toronto, their CEO, the ECDEB Corp of Windsor, Detroit CEO, and Simon. And he laughs because here's the two biggest international daily trade organizations in the world and a little CFDC from Cornwall. But it's really putting our region on the map as someone who's doing cross-border relationships right, or at least making great strides in the right direction. We were also successful in accessing $50,000 worth of funding for Akwesasne for the establishment of an economic development corporation. And that is simply because they said, we need this, we need help to get it, and then we went to work to try and find them the funding. And these are the kind of services that we want to say that we're offering not just Akwesasne, but this community as well. We organized an off-reserve job fair for job seekers in Akwesasne to connect them with employers in Cornwall and surrounding area. We helped to get community members employed through facilitating introductions with multiple companies and assisting and providing those companies with this necessary cultural training to best achieve long-term employment. And we helped to get a member of Akwesasne onto the National Advisory Committee for BizPal at Innovation Canada. And we've received a lot of attention, winning a number of awards for the Tri-Chamber Alliance project. But a lot of it really is groundwork connecting people. The majority of Simon's day is spent taking calls from someone saying, I really need to get a hold of someone in economic development in Akwesasne because I have this idea, or we're looking for a letter of support for this funding application. And it's not quite there to be able to go direct yet. The relationships aren't, they're not as trusting yet. So what we have been able to do is act as a third party that doesn't have vested interest in one community or another. Simon being from New Zealand, he's got an extra special unbiased approach, and New Zealand specifically has had a lot of success in integrating, working with different cultures and their First Nation community there. There's a lot of other successes, but I am short for time. So I just wanted to share them with you, and I don't need to go into our partners, but I'll close by simply saying that we're here to help. We want to make sure that we're providing value to both communities and encouraging more collaboration as a region. We have a lot more to offer, and this is a service that we're funding, independent. We're not, it's important for us that we don't come, for grants to our communities, because we want to serve them by accessing funding in other ways. So it's been something that we're pushing to be entirely self-sustainable in the long run, and it's working well that way. We did not want to come to either community with our hands out and then say that now we'll help you. We wanted to invest a lot of time and energy into proving that this is truly a value to both communities and is going to lift us all up. and I think we've been successful in doing that. So if you have any economic development projects, or, you know, small or big, if you simply want to get connected with someone, then I want to encourage you to consider Simon, the CFDC, as a partner and we're able and willing to help you with any of this stuff. So our contact information is here. And the last, yeah, so the slides are purposely blank because we really want to encourage more of the conversation and less of the referencing of documentation and paperwork. Pick up the phone, give us a call, ask us more questions, we'll go for coffee, whatever you need to understand the project details. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit more about the project, and happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Council? Any questions? Councillor Gardner?
It may be out of your area, but we've also been trying to work with the counties, and I'm wondering if I know you're talking about Messina, Akwesasne, and Cornwall, but what about the counties? Because they are part of our area. So is there any way that you will look into amalgamating them into your projects?
That's an excellent conversation to have a coffee over. I have a lot that we can talk about in that respect, and there's certainly an equal desire to encourage the counties in Cornwall to work together as much, and we are certainly making we have a lot planned to encourage that to happen.
And you're right about this council wanting to get closer to those our neighbors. I understand, being on the Eastern Ontario Health Unit Board, that the problems that come up between the, say, Akwesasne and the Eastern Ontario, we're now servicing, the Eastern Ontario is servicing Akwesasne. And we had to do that in a partnership as a team. So we got it done, and so I really congratulate you for what you're doing. Good, really good work.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Hubert?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I won't say much because a lot of what I want to say may cause a bit of a conflict of interest with my other hat, but I've had the pleasure of working with Leslie on numerous projects, and you're always wonderful to work with. And I think this project in particular, is incredibly important to the city of Cornwall. It's very timely to the city of Cornwall, but I know to the outside regions as well. And I'm sure that there are projects up ahead, city projects, that we can certainly reach out and consult with you, because we, as was mentioned, are doing our best to build those relationships with our neighbors in Akwesasne and work better together. And I think we're off to a great start, and I'm sure you can help us do even more.
We hope so. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Anybody else? I will agree with Councillor Gardner and Councillor Hubert, and add that it's very important to us, not just from an economic development point of view, but from a social development, regional development point of view. So you will notice that I do the land acknowledgement at the top of every meeting. We broke bread together, our two councils, in June, which was great and felt historic, but also really positive. And we recognize how much business is done here by the people of Akwesasne, how much money is spent in our businesses. And so this project is very important and reflects well on our communities and on the work that you might be able to help us get done in the next few years. So thank you, Ms. Thompson, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning Chris's name as well. Appreciate it.
Of course, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to consent items, we have two proclamations. The first one is recommended that council proclaim the week of September 23rd to 29th, 2019 as Rail Safety Week in the city of Cornwall. The second is recommended that council proclaim the month of September 2019 as Prostate Cancer Awareness Month in the city of Cornwall. Our third report is Economic Development Activity Update. The recommendation is that council receive this report. Cornwall Business Enterprise Center, new service agreement. The action recommended is that council receive this report with a subsequent bylaw to be presented at the following council meeting, authorizing the mayor and clerk to sign the service agreement with the province of Ontario for the continued operation of the Cornwall Business Enterprise Center. And our last report is the elected officials' expense statement. And the recommendation is that council receive the statement of expenses for elected officials for the period of June 1st to July 31st, 2019.
Motion for the consent items, Councillor McDonald, Councillor Grant, Councillor Bergeron.
Question?
Go ahead.
Thank you. It's regarding the economic development report, if I may. I have two questions. The first one is,
Councillor, should we go to consent? Right, so normally, if we want to discuss a report, we pull it out of consent as
Yes.
the additions, deletions
which
portion.
I missed, yes.
That's okay.
No, it's fine.
I chair the meeting, so I get to allow you to ask the question.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
My question is simply, the list of companies coming to Cornwall, this is great, I'm all for business coming to Cornwall, but there is an odor in Riverdale and around the, I would say, west end of the city, Brookdale Avenue, and I'm wondering, what can we do about that? I'm all for attracting business here, but is there something we can be doing to make sure that we aren't producing something that is in our history, that hopefully is in our past?
So that's not quite related to the item on the agenda, but I have,
Well, it's
I have
one of the
Mr.
companies
Boileau-
on the
No,
list.
it's okay. I have Mr. Boileau, who's indicated that he can answer the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. So it came to my attention fairly quickly as well, through one of my staff at the Benson Center, in fact. So I visited the property and experienced the exact same problem. And so I have, some contacts with the Ministry of Environment. They've looked into it. They have a file on the case. They, of course, are very aware of everything that historically has been there and is there. They are very comfortable in knowing what the problem was and hope to not experience that again, so.
Thank you.
Is there a timeline for that, Mr. Boileau?
Sorry?
A timeline for,
Well, my call to them was returned that day with a follow-up call the next day, and they were in contact with that company that day. So I think it's a work in progress. Again, I hope that that will not occur again.
I'm sure we'll hear about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. If it isn't remedied.
Right.
So there was a mover and a seconder.
Yes, Madam Mayor.
All in favor of the consent items? Passes. Thank you.
We have no resolutions. Moving on to unfinished business reports. First item is a committee volunteer recognition, and the action recommended is that council receive this report.
So, Madam CAO, do you have any comment about this?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think I will allow Mr. Clark to speak to the report in the background.
Mr. Clark.
Thank you. As we were looking at doing some volunteer recognition, we thought it would best be served through volunteer recognition week that comes in April. With this, we'd like to pick a day or two, depending on how it might work out, and invite all of our volunteers, not just the boards and committees, but those who do with outdoor rinks, the Meals on Wheels, and other programs into the event as well. So we think there's roughly 50, depending on how wide the Adopt a Street program goes. We have a different number, but that is what we would like to do with, obviously, council's agreement on providing volunteer recognition to the volunteers, as we previously discussed.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Any questions from council? Councillor Grant, Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know there's duplication here because Meals on Wheels, they do a volunteer recognition. I do Meals on Wheels. They do a volunteer recognition. So is this going to be another volunteer recognition for people on Meals on Wheels as well?
Mr. Clark?
I don't know if we've looked at it that granularly yet. Like when we looked at it, we were just trying to encompass everybody. If the lodge is doing a program, it wouldn't be our intent to duplicate or duplicate the activity, but we wanted to be as inclusive as possible. If it doesn't make sense based on this feedback, we would limit it to keeping the original program we have, and not supplanting it with this.
There's, the numbers that I get from the adopted street is 1,200. So, we could be having
to have
to
a
move our,
strict
access
RSVP,
to,
yeah.
Ottawa to, anyway, I think that we should put stricter criteria, because you could be opening a door for many, many, many people. It's a budget for it, et cetera. So,
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh?
I'm not gonna stand up, I'll knock this thing over. Yeah, I had the same question as Glenn had. The library also has a volunteer recognition night. I believe Caroline's on the board, she's gonna have anything this year. Also, I thought the 50 was kind of lowballing it, I thought there'd be more than 50. Could we not inquire, presenting volunteers with certificates? I know the member of provincial parliament gives out a certificate to, for people who get involved in volunteer work.
Mr. Clark?
Thank you. That is absolutely one of the ideas we're thinking of through that week at the luncheons, et cetera. And we do have similar, we want criteria around some of the events based on the numbers we were aware, we didn't know. So we are working our way through that. And after tonight, we'll pick a more defined course as we finalize that.
I think it's a great idea. I remember former Mayor Gerald Parisian referring to volunteers as the glue that holds the community together.
Councillor Elaine McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I think it's a wonderful idea too, and I'm happy that finally we've reached the point where we're going to recognize the volunteers. But I think a Cornwall pin would be a very appropriate gift to give every volunteer. It's easier to deal with than a certificate that you might not have wall space for, but a pin you can always wear.
Any other feedback? So the motion is to receive the report, but clearly that's something that Mr. Clark and city staff are going to work on as we go forward.
Absolutely, there's more logistics required. We just want to put this as the date and the idea, concept in play, and go from there.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
Just one quick question, Your Worship,
Sure.
from a technical perspective. Are we going to get a follow-up report in terms of what we're actually doing specifically, or is this kind of our last?
We will come back with more definitive, again, logistics, I guess. I have no lack of a better word
Sure,
for
I
putting the
understand.
event together.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship.
We will also be identifying a small envelope of funds in the 2020 budget for some type of recognition opportunity as well.
I know during the month of April, lots of different organizations do thank yous to their volunteers, and I spent, I think, the entire month going to a lot of volunteer recognition, and they're always the best events to attend. It's easy to say thank you, right, and to recognize people. You need to do it right, and I think a lot of other organizations were doing it right, and the city needs to step it up. So that's what this is about, and we'll look forward to something more detailed. So, motion to receive the report. Councillor McDonald, Councillor Bennett, all in favour? Thank you.
Our second report is the Energy Conservation and Demand Management, 2019 to 2023. Any action recommended is that council receive this report.
So I'll recognize Councillor Bergeron first. Councillor Bergeron.
Well, I'll make the motion to receive it and then speak to it.
Sure.
If
Do
I
I
can.
have a seconder? Councillor Eva. Councillor Bergeron.
So this was a report that I had asked to defer until this meeting, and had the pleasure of working with Mr. Goodwin and Mr. DeWitt. I hope some other councillors took the opportunity to do so as well, but essentially what we're talking about is actionable items to reduce our energy consumption, and that doesn't mean just turning the lights off a little bit more. There will be costs involved in this, and it's outlined, and I'm happy to see this. So I really support this. I know we're just receiving it today, but there is some real concrete things here that we can do to save hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. There's some big, pretty bold steps here to save 30% on our energy consumption. that's fantastic. That's the kind of thing we need to be doing as a city. But the reality is we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings coming off our budget if we execute on this. There are some costs involved. That will come to budget. We will vote on that. We'll debate that. But this report is exactly what I think the city should be doing to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know part of it is the plan will create a task force, and just wondering what the timelines are, if there are timelines for that.
Madam CAO.
At this point in time, no, there aren't timelines identified. I think getting the report received by council this evening, the next steps will be to establish what that task force would be. Probably would be done, I think, within say like a relatively short period, within a few weeks.
As Councilor Bergeron said, this is an important file, and I think the quicker we get the task force together, the better it'll be. It's a cost savings to our community, so thanks for the report.
Thank you. I have Councillor Towndale and Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Some good initiatives in here. We've already undertaken some as well from the previous report. It's good to see that progress is being made. This is important, obviously. I mean, one thing is we don't own our own utility anymore, so obviously we have energy costs. At one time, it may have been a bit different. I just want to make a few comments because, you know, my colleague, Councillor Bergeron, mentioned big, bold ideas, and I think that's a good idea. We have to think big. We have to think bold. We have to move forward. It's the 21st century. It's 2019. I'm happy to see there's a mention here about finally looking at electric or hybrid vehicles. That's something I've mentioned previously in budgets. You know, it's I noticed it talks about a pilot. Personally, I think we should just jump in, and I'll tell you why. Because so when I worked at Queen's Park in 2007, they had hybrids. The government had a fleet of hybrids. Toronto had electric vehicles. This has been done. It's been replicated across the province, across the country, across the continent, and quite frankly, across the world. And when it comes to this, I know that maintenance costs can be higher because there's much more electronic components. That being said, we know we have the lowest electricity in the province. So when it comes to something like this, I'm pretty sure there will be cost savings. Every budget we've looked at, there's always a line about fuel costs for the city where we budgeted X amount and it ends up being Y amount because of fluctuations in the fuel price. I think this is something we need to embrace sooner rather than later, and quite frankly go a little heavier on it because other levels of government and other municipalities have already done this. So I'm almost certain we can consult with them to get the data to see how it'll work for us. Another idea, and I had floated this very briefly during the election, it's something other municipalities do. This is where we come into a bit of a disadvantage. When the FIT program existed provincially, some municipalities decided to put solar panels on the roofs of their larger arenas. Because we're on the Quebec grid, we weren't eligible to participate in the FIT program. That being said, we do have some large facilities, and they cost a lot to power. You know, and we did see, you know, the Civic Complex generator failed. So something we need to look at, I think, and I realize there will be an expensive cost. This is something like putting solar panels on top of the complex to aid with the powering of that building, or the Benson Center. These have a large flat surface on top that we can take advantage of. These are things we need to be looking at. Those are big, bold ideas. So I'm hoping that we'll get to that discussion in this term. I noticed there's some big ticket items when it comes to wastewater management plants, so I think that's something we need to look at as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Well, they both kind of covered what I wanted to say. And one specific area is electric buses that I've been asking for the last 12 or 15 years. It's always a budget issue, but we never think that we have to spend a little bit of money to save down the road, and that's what I'm hoping that administration will look at, electric buses. I was in Quebec City 15 years ago and they were running electric buses, so well, we're behind, way behind everybody else. And I'm glad to see this report and something's going to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Back.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I imagine there will be a constant stream of communication between this task force and the up-and-coming Environment and Climate Change Committee. I feel like there's a lot of work that they could be doing collaboratively or, you know, planning off to the other. I feel like a lot of what's under here were conversations that I'm sure were going to take place at the Climate Change Committee. So good to see that we'll have two really strong task force committee attacking all of this. So the nods are good, thank you. Other than that, I'm sure I can comment on all of these items, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to say yes to all of this. Thank you for this. The report is excellent. I really enjoyed reading it. It's very technical, yet I was able to understand most of it. Thank you for that. And I'm really looking forward to seeing these targets of 30% in, 4 years, which is really excellent, ambitious, but I think it's time we start setting these really ambitious goals. Thank you.
Any other comment?
Just
Councillor McIntosh?
one observation, we used to have electric buses, by the way, Sid. They were called trolleys.
Oh, my goodness, Councillor.
Right on.
When it comes to energy conservation, I know there must be a method of the madness here, but every time I walk by Riverdale Park at 9 o'clock at night, all the floodlights are on, the tennis courts. Nobody ever plays tennis after September at this time of night. Are they on a timer? Is that the reason why, or somebody? And I know that's not the only tennis court.
Yeah, I can answer that through you, Madam Mayor. Some of our tennis courts are on a push-button activation, so when you push the button, the lights come on for an hour, and then they'll turn themselves off after an hour. There's a buzzer that sounds that tells you got to push it again. Now there are others that will come on based on a timer, where they turn on at 6:30 p.m. and then shut off at 11 p.m. every day.
Yeah, that's pretty late this time of year for tennis players. They're usually, Long John's on. Yeah. I just find it, my walk's usually about 70, 75 minutes, same as Sid Gardner. And I go by there and I'll come back 70 minutes later and the lights are still on, and nobody's around.
Well, we could have them checked out and see if
I just wonder if the
there's
person,
something wrong there.
the
But
night foreman that drives around sometimes, if they could hit the button and call it a night.
Possibly, the availability of having a staff person to do that manually is a bit taxing, but we're better
I
operating.
know, it's just
with
funny,
push
we
buttons
talk
or
energy
timers.
conservation, yet there's an example, we could read a novel sitting there in the tennis court. Okay.
Any other comments? So I want to thank Councillor Bergeron for working with Mr. Goodwin. This is proving to be a very progressive council, especially on the issue of the urgency that we feel around conservation and energy conservation. It's not just about cost savings, that's a great, great benefit, but there's also some stewardship that we're taking care of as well. So I was glad to see this fleshed out in the way that it has been. Going back to Councillor Grant's point about a task force, so you will recall through our strategic planning discussion that there were other task forces that I need to work on. So I will sit down with the CAO and we will endeavor to do that in a most timely way. So you will hear further from me on the issue of task forces in the coming weeks. So we had a mover and a seconder. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Moving on to communications, our first report is the open air burning, with a recommendation that council approve the recommendation to rescind bylaw 2014-63 and replace it with an updated bylaw which ceases the practice of open air burning in the city of Cornwall.
So I'm going to turn to Madam CAO to introduce this item.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I am going to ask Chief Wazin to introduce the report.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. Essentially, the Ontario Fire Code prohibits open-air burning unless a municipality has the tools, i.e. a bylaw, to allow it. And essentially, the City of Cornwall has a bylaw in place that allows for open-air burns in accordance with certain conditions. I've been monitoring the performance of this bylaw, and essentially the reason it's in front of you today is because I think the data is telling us that we have some issues with the performance of the bylaw. Before you is a report that contains some data, but I want to make sure that everyone understands that the data is there to talk about the performance of the bylaw. I can get into that a little bit, but not with regards to your fire service responding to complaints. That's not at issue. We serve to the at the pleasure of council, and we will continue to do that if that's required. I think the issue is that for a relatively small amount of permits in place, we have a relatively high amount of complaints. The numbers have increased since the report that's in front of you. We've had an additional 12 to 15 complaints in the last week, so we're at 77 complaints for 260 active permits. The main issue, so although we do respond to complaints for folks that are burning that do not have permits, the majority of the complaints are relative to well-intended people that follow the rules of the bylaw, but for certain reasons, have created some smoke issues in their areas, and neighbors call in to complain. So some of the issues that occur are in some instances, people are burning wood that is not approved under the bylaw. In other instances, we have the change of direction of wind, and that leads to the complaints. So in light of the fact that 0.5% of our residents actually use the bylaw, and the fact that the numbers of complaints continue to grow, and obviously, as contained in the report, the health and environmental effects of open-air burning, and the emerging new technology available. So, fuel-based appliances are now available at reasonable costs. What I'm proposing is that we roll back the practice of using wood-based open-air permit system in the city, and just allow the residents to use fuel-based appliances as long as they're approved and certified, without the need of a permit system and without having to have the fire department go and check, because those appliances are in fact safe and very practical. So that's essentially the report in front of you.
Council, there is a recommendation made by administration, but if somebody's prepared to make that motion, or we can have conversation as well. Councillor McIntosh.
I'm quite willing to make the motion to support the chief's proposal. There might be a couple of tweaks that could be done, but it's...
Councillor McIntosh makes the motion. Is there a seconder? Councillor Bennett. Okay, debate. Do you want to start, Councillor?
Sure. I've received several complaints from people, various areas of town, who have breathing problems, and how it's the same story. Somebody starts a bonfire, and they're burning type of wood they're burning that the medical officer of health tells us is dangerous, that it's given off, and they have to close their windows because they have various breathing problems such as asthma and whatnot. I don't think people should have to do that. Interesting, Chief, I noticed your survey of some of the communities, how Belleville one of the few that allows open air burning of wood, but the restrictions are you'd have to live on 20 acres of land and not have anybody near you. So most Ontario communities do not allow it. I think the medical officer of health lays it out in pretty good terms, so I really don't think with the propane type of fuel has really become much more popular, and that's one way they can go. And you're grandfathering in the bylaw, so it doesn't mean you go to somebody who's just put $1,000 into a fire pit and say, turn it off tomorrow. So we are giving them a chance, and in 3 years we will be completely free. So I think it's a good bylaw, good step in the right direction in the name of health.
Councillor Elaine McDonald.
I concur with my colleague.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to the fire chief. The only concern I have with this bylaw, and I agree with it, is that I don't think it should be including the rural areas of our city. So if we have people, basically farmland space, they wouldn't be affecting anybody with this kind of a fire ban. Like Belleville, your report is right. I have family members in Belleville that can't get a permit to save their lives, but it seems to be it's the fire chief's discretion. So I'm sure there's rules in place as to what, I'm sure it's just not he can just decide who has a fire. I'm sure there are rules in place so that there are possibly spaces within the city that this wouldn't be a problem, and you don't have to worry about a neighbor not being able to enjoy their own property. So is there a chance that we could possibly tweak this a little bit to maybe be a little more lenient with the rural properties we have in our community? If, for example, if we were to build a campground in Gatineau Park, like I'm going to start pushing for shortly, we wouldn't be able to have a campfire. So I'm just wondering if there's some room to tweak it.
Chief Wazir?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. Essentially, so number one, farmland has a special exemption under the code. So this, whatever city bylaw applies wouldn't impact them at all. With regards to rural properties, if you will, essentially the bylaw that we have now essentially restricts the use of open air burns dependent on how close your fire pit is to certain combustibles. So in short, we'd be doing the same kind of thing and maybe looking at different or more stringent restrictions. The code does continue to allow the fire chief to make a decision with regards to allowing certain open air burns. Some municipalities will do this for special events. I understand that there are some commercial applications where a business would like to use a wood-based kind of barbecue for a special event. These kinds of things that can be done under the act. I think the proposal is, the problem is there's almost as many different ways of approaching this issue as there are municipalities in Ontario. And I, for one, am not a big proponent of leaving it to the fire chief, because that just creates some gray area. I would allow, I think this bylaw gets the bureaucracy out of the process. We stick to the fuel-based appliances. We get the fire department out of the process, and we just allow people, probably more people, to enjoy fires on their property.
Thank you for that. I'll just add this comment. I came back to Cornwall 12 years ago from Glen Walter, and we had a bonfire every weekend. It was fantastic. So I moved to Cornwall. I thought, I bought this little fire pit, and I put it back in my yard, and I would have a bonfire. And then I kept watching the smoke going down my neighbor's yard. My wife was getting mad that we were angering our new neighbors, so we waited another weekend, and we thought, oh, no wind tonight, we'll have another one. Well, the wind picked up, smoke, so we felt bad. So we haven't had a fire in 11 years. And then this year, she talked me into spending some money, and we bought a gas fire pit for our deck, and we're out there like every night. And it's the easiest thing ever. It's a click and it starts, and it's a click and it's off. So I think we're not telling people you can't have a fire. We're just telling people it's got to be a different type of fire. And it's just as enjoyable. And that's from a guy that camps and has bonfires as often as he possibly can. The gas fireplace certainly fits the bill. Thanks.
Councillors DePel and then Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I was elected 9 years ago, and I won't say the person's name publicly because I haven't spoken to her for some time, but she was an activist to stop open air burning. And her husband has now passed away, but it was for medical reasons that she was an activist to have it stopped. And there was certainly no appetite from around the table at that time to even get it to where it is today. So through you, Madam Mayor, to our chief, what has changed? And I realize that you were not the chief at the time, but what has changed?
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you for the question. Actually, this is so I've been watching this bylaw since I've been here. Obviously, because of my profession, I'm not a proponent of allowing people to light fires regularly, but I think the issue immediately when I got here, I wanted to address this issue. But the issue is, and I stated that clearly in the report, there is no fire risk because of open air burns. So I always felt that in some ways it's not my place as much as it may be someone else's to bring it to council in light of the fact that there's no safety risk to allowing the fires. We have had no structural fires linked to allowing people to have fires in their backyard. However, now that it's gotten to a point where it's keeping us busy, way more busy than it should, and having crews run around the city, getting involved in skirmishes between neighbors, I don't think is good business practice. So I would say that's why I'm taking a little bit of a risk here and bringing the issue to council for their consideration.
All right. So my other question is, I like to think that as a city councillor that I'm an active listener, and I know my position on this, but I'm just wondering as to why it's here to make a decision this evening without actually getting feedback from the people who want open air burning, because as a councillor, I haven't had the opportunity to even engage with residents as to why we should oppose this and why we should accept this. And it's such a, I think it's a controversial issue that I think that we needed the time to have that engagement.
Through you, so the normal course of business through council is obviously the bylaw won't be approved until the next council meeting. So that allows council some time to, you could accept the recommendation, but there's still some room for council to either, hold back the bylaw. So that's number one. Number two, we considered engaging the residents on this, but it's a difficult thing to do when the number of people who can actually sign up for a permit is very limited in the way that the current bylaw is written. It's hard to ask for someone for an opinion on an issue if the bylaw doesn't actually apply to them. So I chose that the data that we currently have, so we know what the regular uptake of the bylaw is in terms of its popularity and use, and then we know the amount of complaints that we get, so we're getting data specifically from the people in which the bylaw applies to. I know that some councillors, Councillor Towndale, I think has, and from the news media posts on social media, I've been reading the comments. I certainly take all the comments to heart. And when I compared the list of folks that are commenting on the bylaw to the list of people that have the permits, very few of those people actually have permits. I mean, you're always going to get comments and opinions, but I don't know that, I think the data that we have is more apropos to the people in which are affected by this bylaw.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Duppel. Councillor Bergeron, and then Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My first point, I suppose, is that it's really important to highlight that no fires have happened as a result of this bylaw, and that is a key statistic here. My first question, I suppose, is to the clerk. If we're rescinding a bylaw, I know I'm still new here, why would it not require 6 councillors to bring this back to the table? We're essentially being asked to vote on changing a bylaw, the nature of it.
By presenting it this evening, we're dealing with it at the next council meeting. So it could fit the notice of period. However, when it comes to a bylaw, the 2/3 majority for doing something would be whatever affects the council, a procedure or a way of doing something, a normal practice.
Not sure I understand.
So we repeal bylaws all the time. We replace bylaws all the time without having to do public notice. But in this case, there is public notice. It's on this agenda, and then the bylaw is scheduled for the next council meeting.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, it sounds to me like we have an enforcement issue, not a bylaw issue. And so where the recommendation here is that we, at the very least, update the bylaw to, specifics for grade, pads, park. I have no problem with that. No problem whatsoever changing the bylaw to help you, to be more specific, to be a little better for the people of Cornwall. But I'm strongly opposed to passing this as a motion today. I don't think there's an issue with open fire burning. I fully support it strongly. I flew from France to oppose this today. I'm not even kidding. I know I didn't want to add that in there, but at the end of the day, I reread the bylaw, and I think it's fine. I think it just needs a little updating so that it can be better enforced. I think bylaw enforcement needs to step in a little bit so that the fire department is not being the mediator between, neighbors. But as it stands, I'm fully opposed to the motion that's on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a list, and Councillor Hollingsworth is on the list. I have Councillor Towndale, Councillor Grant, Councillor Hollingsworth, Councillor Gardner. I'm keeping up, sir. All right, Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, Chief, I'm glad you follow me on social media, but in this case, I think, I'm probably in the minority, but I'm with Councillor Bergeron. I do oppose this. And for a number of reasons. As the chief illustrated, we cannot trace any structure fires to open air burning. There's no correlation that we see here. In addition, I disagree with what you said, Chief, about the bylaw only applying to certain people. I understand it's because there's setbacks and people don't meet that setbacks, but the bylaws apply to everybody. So people can have an opinion on it even if they can't have their own fire pit. I think their opinion's valid, quite frankly. And it might not be their fire pit they're using, but they might be going to a friend's house or a family member's house or relative's house and enjoying it there as well. I think I agree with Councillor Bergeron that, it seems to be taking up a lot of the time of the fire department. And I understand how it fell into the lap of the fire department. It deals with fire, but I think the bylaw department can handle a lot of it, because when someone applies for these permits, measurements are taken to ensure setbacks. That's not really a function of a firefighter. A permit is issued. That's not a function of the fire department. I think that it should be more so under bylaw. I think it's an antiquated function. This bylaw, it was updated in 14 and 09 and whatnot, but I think parts of it date back further and need to be updated in that sense, where it's handed off to the proper department for enforcement and regulation, and that should relieve the burden off the fire department. As you mentioned, I was getting feedback from residents, so I put out a post on social media to get more feedback because I want to hear about this. And out of all the comments I've received, and I've gotten some private messages, some emails as well, I would say 99% were do not change this bylaw, or no, do not ban fires, do not ban open air burning. So I would say a majority of residents are actually opposed to changing this and banning it outright. And as Councillor DePaul mentioned, we need to listen to the residents. I understand there's some issues and there's some complaints, but to ban it outright, to me, is a knee-jerk reaction. We talk about only so many people have permits, 260 permits, but the complaints are 60. But that's described as a majority of residents. I don't see how that works, quite frankly. In this report, it's written in there like that. So I won't support this motion, but I would support a review of the bylaw and the structure and how it's enforced. And I really think it should fall under bylaw, and we should take a look at it from there to start. I'd also like to add, in addition, for example, it was discussed commercial use of fire for cooking, but for example, the NAV Center has 2 fire pits on its property that it uses not for cooking. They do have fire pits for cooking, but they have fire pits as well as part of the ambiance that they're trying to offer. So, right now, if we ban this outright, that captures them as well. So I think there's going to be a negative kind of impact here on a number of functions within the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Towndale. I have Councillors Grant and then Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First question, I didn't realize that we were going to be grandfathering. I thought we passed this in a bylaw in a couple of weeks. There's no more open air fires.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the intent is to immediately stop selling permits, but for those who have recently bought a permit, we would allow them to finish off the period of time in which the permit applies. So in short, we wouldn't see our last fire until if somebody took a permit for 3 years last week, they would see the permits are valid from April to October, so we would see that in October in 21.
I don't agree with that neither, but I guess that's part of the bylaw. I didn't see it in the bylaw, but I guess that's the understanding. We're missing the health and safety of our residents in our community. And this council, I'm sure never was called an environmentalist. I was probably a Neanderthal when it comes to the environment. But I've learned a lot. And one of the things we talk about all the time are greenhouse gases. And the effects of wood smoke add to that from the reports that I've read. So we're talking from both sides of our mouth. We're listening to a few people complain, oh, I can't have an open fire. Well, you can't have an open fire. You just have to use another form of combustion. I listen to the people who have respiratory problems. And to me, even if we harm one person in this community, it's too many. And we are. Now, I see neighbors who have to close their windows because some person decides, I'm going to have a fire in the middle of the afternoon. So they call the fire department. So we send somebody else down. It doesn't matter. We should eliminate all open fires. And there's no reason why we shouldn't. I haven't heard one good reason from anybody. I heard good reasons for banning it, and I think if it was up to me, it'd be banned immediately, not wait 3 years. But let's wait 3 years. There should be exceptions, though, and I agree with some kinds of exceptions. But as the chief said, there's special permits, and you can get those special permits, right? You have the authority to do that?
That's correct, and I think, and I've seen the NAV Center letter today. So there are some provisions under the act that provide for, you know, exemptions under commercial cooking applications. So I mean, we're willing to work with the special events piece, or the, you know, we only have one NAV Center. There's certainly certain things that we can do there under the code without having to implement a bylaw to include certain groups.
Another thing, you know, you talk about the demographics in our community. This community is getting older all the time, and there's where the respiratory problems come in. We're just hurting people. We got to stop hurting people. Let's get this ban in and get it over with, and next week we'll not hear anything about it.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. Chief, a couple of minor technical questions and perhaps a comment. If I understand it from the report, hopefully I read it correctly, if I get a permit, how long can I burn fires on my property? Did I get 3 years, right?
Correct.
So I get a permit, I can burn fire this spring, next spring. Second of all, it says here, city does not have any fringe outlying rural areas. While I'm not an urban planner, I think most of us would agree that anything west of McConnell Avenue, McConnell sort of South Branch Road is definitely outlying. It's very rural, Summer Heights Golf Course and all of that abutting area. So while I'm not necessarily looking to engage in a debate, I think that would definitely kind of fall into that periphery, or that kind of sort of the definition. Now, I guess we have some provisions that allow you to grant permits, but certainly we're talking about country. A couple of things, Your Worship, that has come up. We talk about things like, you know, air quality and natural quality and greenhouse gases. Well, if you burn natural gas, you're still creating greenhouse gases, right? Propane, natural gas, it's all greenhouse gases. And so if we're banning fires because we're worried about the environment, well, arguably you could make a reasonable discussion to say we should just stop banning all fires because they all create greenhouse gases, right? Second of all, we talk about wood burning fires. Well, in my home uptown, I have a fireplace and I burn wood. So if we're worried about, you know, smoke and people's quality of air, then by extension, we should say, well, nobody can have wood burning fireplaces inside either, because we're still generating smoke and still undermining air quality, and potentially the neighbors may still be angry at me for having a wood fire in my fireplace because I'm creating smoke. So, that being said, Your Worship, I won't support a complete ban. I would have thought perhaps a 1-year permit, case by case, and perhaps if somebody can't follow some basic provisions under the bylaw, then maybe we deny that permit the following year or whatever. But I can't support a complete ban, Your Worship, because, well, it's been said there's no evidence to say. And then finally, I suppose we can talk about people's quality of air and breathing. Well, we made paper for 100 years, and that's just the nature of things. We emit gases from cars and the like. So in terms of air quality, everything we do that burns anything undermines air quality. I think, Your Worship, as has already been articulated, there is perhaps some tweaking of the bylaw itself. And as far as neighbors go, I don't know how you can legislate neighbors to get along anyway in terms of it's the nature of things sometimes. So I won't support a complete utter ban while I think we can change who's supposed to enforce it, as opposed to the fire department, perhaps by law enforcement, but I can't support a complete ban either. Thank you.
So Councillor Hollingsworth, while you were speaking, Chief Wazin wanted to respond, so I will.
Thank you, through you. I perked up when you started speaking about a total ban, but that's not, I wanted to maybe touch on.
Well, perhaps I misread it then.
No, you seem to propose that might be the way to go, and I would enjoy that, but I wanted to speak to fireplaces. I mean, the building codes and the such outline the requirements for chimney heights, and that's exactly for that reason, to try to expel smoke at a higher pace away from, and it still affects neighbors, to your point. And I know that there are some municipalities that ban fireplaces in the home as well, and that's not included in this at all.
Okay. One question, Chief, while I have you then, seeing how we're going that way, we'll clean it all up. If I have, and once again, if I have a fireplace outside right now, I've made my brick fireplace, it has the chimney, it's all enclosed, and I'm gonna have my friends over and we're gonna have a fire. Under what you're suggesting, does that ultimately become illegal as well in 3 years' time?
Correct.
Yeah, which brings me, thank you, which brings me to my final points. People have invested some serious money under the auspices that they can have these fires, and now we're going to say, no, sorry, you've invested all this money. Well, too bad for you, because we've just changed our mind. So I'm not completely in agreement with the current version of, or the proposed bylaw, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Gardner.
Well, I'm going to, through you, support what the chief has brought forward. Anybody who read the report and who read Dr. Paul's information about how injurious it is to your health cannot do anything but vote in favor of this. I was involved with the smoking bylaw. It's smoke. It hurts people. It hurts your health. Just recently read a scientist report that what we're throwing into the environment, including smoke, is giving us 11 and a half to 12 years to pull back on what we're putting in the environment, or this earth is in trouble. In terms of outside of the city, as we talk about, I had a discussion with the chief, and chief, could you tell me, or tell council what you told me about the email I got from somebody who was cutting bush and burning bush? Can you tell me how injurious that is?
Well, absolutely. I think the conversation was that, some people were concerned that this bylaw would prevent them from cutting trees and burning the branches and burning the trees that were just cut. And the reality is our current bylaw prevents that as well. The current bylaw is clear in that the only cured wood is what is supposed to be burnt in the city. And I know, we know, and we encounter that all the time, that people are clearing brush, they're cleaning, and they're burning that, which is already something that goes against the requirements of the current bylaw.
And so there's poisonous smoke going into the air, burning greenwood, right?
Correct.
Okay. At the end of the day, the environment is what counts with me tonight to support this. And secondly, what Dr. Paul said about the health issues that are caused by this. So I'm in favor of the bylaw as it stands.
Councillor Dye?
I didn't raise my hand, but you've read my mind. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Might as well. I'll be honest, I walked in here earlier tonight having no idea how I was going to vote on this bylaw. I support aspects of it. I don't on others. I've always been a fan of fire pits and burning things. I lived in the country for most of my childhood. We did this often. It was something we did on the regular, opportunity together as family. I guess when we moved to Cornwall, we never thought it was something that we could do, so we never did. I understand that it has been possible, but we never went as far as doing that. I do understand the health concerns. Actually, it would have been hours before the news broke that council was going to be discussing this, I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine without knowing this was coming and realizing that she has some serious health concerns. She lives in the country, and oftentimes she has to close her windows and make sure that she's, not near any open fires, and because of some serious respiratory issues. And these are people that live in the country with, large space between properties. So I can only imagine how much worse it gets when it's in close, intimate quarters, like the city of Cornwall. So I guess I'm realizing there's enough support for this motion. Not entirely opposed, Chief. I think it has some merit. I think having the opportunity to have propane fires, which we also had on the weekend out in the country because of the rain under a tent, don't tell anyone, is a great opportunity for those who still want to have small fires in their city homes. So I guess I'm going to convince myself and talk myself into voting for this permit. Thank you for allowing me to make that decision out loud.
No problem. Chief was in, I'm not sure I understand the difference between propane versus gas versus fire burning. People seem to know more about open air fires than I do. I don't want to speak with any authority at all. So I'd rather try and understand.
It's through you, to you, Miss Mayor. It's as simple as this. Wood base, and we'll talk about cured, appropriate wood to burn here. Doesn't it basically it burns incomplete. So there's a lot of byproducts that are created and released into the environment, and the health issue stems from the particulate matter, right? So the tiny pieces of material that float up into the air and people ingest and breathe, and if you add any paints or treatments to the wood or any other, if you think about pressed wood or that kind of matter, it gets worse because you're burning glues. When you're burning fuel-based appliances, and there's various types of fuel, they offer a more complete combustion. So natural gas burns 99.9% of itself, and essentially that's why it's a preferred method of heating your home, because they're so efficient, and it basically burns the majority of itself during that process. So it's a cleaner burn. It's not 100% perfect for the environment, but it is better than whatever incomplete combustion process occurs from other materials. Does that make any sense at all?
Propane is the same idea?
Propane, they have different burn rates, but absolutely. So that's why in the bylaw we're specific in saying that we'll allow butane, we'll allow propane, natural gas, as long as it's an approved, certified appliance, and that's done through ULC. There's a body that applies certain standards in making sure that these appliances are approved and are safe for use. So essentially, this is what we would be doing. We would essentially be saying that we will stop regulating this practice, but if you use this approved appliance, you're good to go.
How much do those cost?
We've seen some for sale for $150, and the permit costs $100. So we have had some people come and apply for permits, and we've tried to talk them out of it and said, you know what, if you use that $100 towards an appliance, you'll reap the benefits. And we've had folks come back and say, you know what, thank you, because it's so much easier. We can close it, go to bed, and not worry about embers and that kind of thing.
And there's no permit required for those?
There will be no permit required. Industry is taking care of that.
So what about marshmallows, Chief Wazin? Because this is...
It's important.
There was a lot of conversation about this, so you have to realize, and I want to go back to your comment about why you chose not to engage with the public. So I want to come back to that, but I'll ask you about marshmallows first and then go to that.
So I have 2 young kids, and marshmallows are a must, and we certainly roast marshmallows and, trust me, other things on a propane-based fireplace.
So earlier in response to, I think maybe Councillor Duppel's question, I'm not sure, forgive me if I didn't get that right, but the engagement with the community ahead of putting this on the agenda. You said, if you could repeat that or more, maybe
Yeah.
elaborate on that, because I'm, as you know, big on community engagement. I don't necessarily think that we individually as councillors through our Facebook pages should have to do that. We can do it. It's good practice for elected officials to do that. But I think that as a city, we may want to do that in a more formal way. And so I'd like your comment on that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the bylaw that we currently have is explicit in the requirements in which one can apply for a permit or be granted a permit. And some of those requirements are based on, for example, ownership. If you rent a property, the owner of the property needs to sign off on the permit application, and truthfully, we don't see that many owners that are okay with allowing their tenants to apply for and receive a permit to burn. So that right there limits, the amount of people that are eligible for a permit in its current sense. So the point is, we chose to look at the data that's in front of us. So there's 0.5% of our population have a permit, and that's been consistent through, since 2014. There's no spike, and even this week, I'll be honest, since the media took this on, I expected that we would have a lineup of people coming out the door of people applying for permits, and we haven't seen that. So the way the bylaw is written, it only applies to a small percentage of people in the city. Yet it leads to a pretty high return in complaints. And to me, and that may be wrong, but that's a pretty good gauge on the performance of a bylaw, at least enough for me to bring it to council for your consideration.
So there are 260 permits out there, but there are more than that in terms of fires that take place then, right? Or is that?
Well, correct, right? Because one
assume
permit, someone could burn every night from April to October, right? That allows you to do that.
And do you think there are people burning without permits?
Oh, yes, and we see those, and those we've tried to kind of.
Those the subject of complaints, or?
Sometimes we tried to pull that data out because that's a separate issue, right? The issue of complaints. I call them valid complaints about people who are burning illegally. That we deal with those, and we enforce that, and we can continue to enforce the current bylaw. But the point is, I think the performance of the bylaw, in the way that it's written, in the way that it's applied, shows that, in an urban setting, perhaps it's not appropriate. There are many cities our size have their way of dealing with the issue, and the majority of them just outlaw open air burning of wood products of any sort.
Thank you. So I know that Councillor Elaine McDonald wanted to speak. I will allow that. Is there anybody else? And otherwise, I'll go to Councillor Mack to wrap up.
Thanks. And I deferred speaking in the past because I thought everything I wanted to say was going to be said and had been said by Councillor McIntosh. And a few people have alluded to Dr. Paul's report. And I can't understand why, when Dr. Paul clearly says burning wood smoke is bad for the environment, it produces greenhouse gases. I mean, the whole country is under war against climate change related to the burning of greenhouse gases. And the second thing that burning wood smoke does is impairs health, one's own and your neighbors. I don't understand what there is to decide here. In the last issue, when we talked about energy conservation, we congratulated ourselves on being progressive. Are we just about saving money? Or are we about making the world a little bit of a better place in our progressiveness? And surely, if we simply ask people to do what Councillor Bennett did, burn propane or natural gas instead of wood, and you won't be hurting your neighbor. I mean, look at the list of things it does. Reduces lung function, develops bronchitis, premature death, heart attacks, irregular heartbeat, cancer, infant mortality, and low birth weight. I mean, it goes on and on. I can't believe we're debating this, Madam Mayor. I think that there's no issue here. You know, I used to have this very wise principal who used to say, it's great to have your rights, but your rights stop when you swing your arm and you hit somebody else's nose. And essentially, if you're burning wood, that's what you're doing. You might be exercising your right, but you're impacting negatively anybody else in your immediate environs. So, to my mind, this is a non-issue, and I think the chief has found a wonderful way to let people keep burning if they choose to, without hurting themselves, their family, their kids, their neighbors. So, I support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. Councillor McIntosh, do you want to wrap up?
Sure. It's all about health, as simple as that. We don't allow smoking in public places. Can't light up a cigarette unless you're with 150 miles from a store. We're talking about banning cigarette smoking on a bicycle path because people are affected by it. And yet we have councillors say, oh, just keep burning in the backyard. That's no problem. You got a senior citizen, an elderly senior citizen living in a house. Right, and this happened. Guy next door, big bonfires going all night. Guy over there, big bonfires going all night. They got to close their windows, nice summer day or evening. We just say, suck it up. That's what we're saying. Or move. And hopefully the neighbors there don't have bonfires. Can you imagine 280 permits, Chief?
That's right.
Imagine if everybody got their fire going every day in their backyards. It's a hypothetical case, but every day they're going to be burning. I had a personal case the other day, neighbor half a block away. I didn't realize he had a small fire going. And I said to my wife, something must be burning downtown. Must be a fire. And I go in the backyard and I realize smoke's all drifting over my backyard and my neighbor's backyard. And that's when it hit me. Wow, imagine if I had a breathing problem. I'd have to go inside. I wouldn't be able to sit out my gazebo at my deck. So I think just to say, well, you know, we're going to make it hard for people who want to have a bonfire. I think we're making it hard for the people who have breathing problems. And go back to Dr. Paul's report. Hey, the guy's a medical doctor. And he's not making this stuff up. He's saying, here it is. Chief, how many calls would you get at night?
Well, if we were, through you, Madam Mayor, if we were to look at this week, we got 12, and those are primarily Friday, Saturdays. So
Okay.
we could get 3-4 calls.
Yeah. And when we talk about a bylaw enforcement, they close at 5 o'clock at night. How are they going to enforce that? Anyway, I'm going to ask for a knee-jerk reaction. Morris DePel said 9 years ago we were discussing this. It's hardly a knee-jerk reaction. It's been 9 years, 7 years before our council. We keep kicking it down. I think it's time to take action. I think I got more complaints about this from people who are almost, you know, they're sincere in saying, you've got to do something. I can't live like this. And more complaints of traffic, for sure. So if you want to vote against the bylaw, then when the person calls, just say, suck it up, ma'am. We don't agree with it. Anyway, I hope we approve this. And a 3-year break-in period is good. Councillor Grant may not agree with that, but it's people who do have it, at least they got 3 years to switch over to a propane type. By the way, Chief, where'd you get one for $100?
Yeah. I don't think it's appropriate that I name.
Thank you. Did you say you were going to call for a recorded vote?
Yes.
Yes. So before we do that, I'd like to, as I always do, let people how I'm going to vote. So I'm going to support the motion. I am going to say, though, that debate is important, and I will always encourage debate around the table, always. And to your point, Councillor Mack, in terms of knee-jerk or whatever reaction Councillor DePel had, I'm going to say that I understand Councillor DePel's reaction. This is a new council, and things come on an agenda, oftentimes without a whole lot of advance notice. And here we are at functions on the weekend getting all kinds of reaction, and possibly using our Facebook pages and all of that to try and see what's going on. So, I understand some of the councillors' frustration around how we ended up here. However, I do find the information around health to be compelling. Most compelling of all is that most municipalities, or many municipalities, no longer allow this. And so it is a process of moving forward. I know many people will be disappointed and angry, and I fully expect everyone to communicate with us as we take the next 2 weeks to think about this and then look at the bylaw when it comes forward. So I'm going to support the motion. However, I've made those comments just for transparency purposes. Madam Clerk.
Councillors Claude McIntosh.
Yes.
Elaine McDonald.
Yes.
Sid Gardner.
Yes.
Dean Hollingsworth.
Opposed.
Councillor Caroline Hébert.
Yeah.
Councillors Maurice Dupel.
Yes.
Glenn Grant. Todd Bennett.
Yes.
Justin Towndale.
No.
Eric Bergeron.
Opposed.
And Madam Mayor.
Oui.
We do have a majority.
Thank you. Next item, Madam Clerk.
The strategic plan with a recommendation that council approve and adopt the attached strategic plan for 2019 to 2022.
Okay, Councillor Grant? Did you want to make that?
Approved.
Make the motion? Councillor Bennett, you support?
Yes.
Any comments? Councillor Elaine McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do have a comment actually about two of these points. The first one I'd like to address is under 4, economic development. Number 4, attract sporting events via tourism. And I know we added tourism to our strategic plan, and I was very happy about that. But I didn't catch at our strategic plan meeting the link to sports. And I totally agree with it because, I mean, sporting activities are lucrative. In fact, we're facing the Shorty Jenkins coming up soon, and then in December we're going to have the World Junior A Challenge, and we're thrilled about both events because it directly enhances our bottom line. But at the same time, there is even more lucrative tourism activity that will enhance our bottom line even further, and that is cultural tourism. I have pulled some unbelievable stats from a report done by Hill Strategies Research for the Ontario Arts and Culture Tourism activities. And a couple here. In 2014, the impact of cultural tourism in Ontario was $61.7 billion, or 3.3% of our GDP. And from the same research, the estimates for the next year for the direct economic impact of culture was set at $67.1 billion, which was 10 times larger than the estimates for sports tourism and activities, which was set at $6.1 billion. Jobs estimate in the culture sector were estimated to be 700,000, which was 7 times larger than the estimate for the sports sector, which was 103,700 jobs. So, I mean, these are overwhelming statistics, and it's a curious thing. We all recognize the value of sports, and I think we don't recognize the economic, financial, money value of the arts because we haven't had the kind of arts profile that would have generated the kind of buzz and excitement and the knowledge on our part of what it can contribute to our economy. But other communities have locked onto it. And now we have bought ourselves a facility that could well be the epicenter of a fabulous industry, a very lucrative one. And so please, let's keep sports there as a way we're going to generate tourist dollars. But for God's sake, put the big one, which is cultural tourism. Let's add that to it. Because, I mean, why run a race with one leg tied behind yourself, eh?
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. Your point is well taken. I don't recall adding or being so specific that we
I
wanted
don't
to
either.
add sporting events. I understood that we were adding tourism as a broad topic. So that's my recollection. I don't know if Councillor Grant, and then I'll CAO might want to address that as well.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think I brought this up and we're talking as an example of the sporting event. I don't think it was specific, so if we just took sporting out of that and leave events, would that not cover?
Well, we just want to leave tourism, which is what.
Yeah, events through tourism.
Yes, Madam CAO.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I might have been too specific based on some of the comments at that last meeting, but what we could do is we could also change it slightly to say attract tourism through arts, culture, and sporting events, right? So we could put a comment in with tourism and all of those components, which I think might have been part of Councillor McDonald's, or it could be left as tourism.
Okay, so this strategic planning process has been through consensus.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to, again, do the same. So, so the suggestion is that we add cultural activities to that one. Is that how people are feeling, or just keep it tourism? I just want to see some nods and.
Tourism.
Okay, so tourism, and we'll add cultural, tourism, and sporting events. So we'll have both. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, and now,
There was another point I wanted to make too.
go ahead, Councillor McDonald.
Okay, well, it relates to the second point, the skilled workforce. I did a little bit of research and found that the Canadian Federation of Municipalities has determined that 18 mid-sized Ontario cities reported using cultural and recreational amenities as a tool for downtown revitalization, and 83% of them found it was an effective tool. But even beyond that, we are trying to attract a skilled workforce. In fact, it says so here. And the Canadian Federation of Municipalities goes on to say that there's no better way to attract a skilled, talented, innovative, think outside the box workforce than by having a creative cultural industry. Because creativity and arts and culture attract thinkers who work outside the box. So there's such an excellent spin-off from us actually putting that word culture in there. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to speak to that. The next step is clearly going to be an implementation plan. So the strategic planning process was, as you will recall, done in 2 sessions. And now we have a document that's close to where we want it to be. The next step is for administration to come back with an implementation program around this. Clearly, we're going to be spelling out issues like the Arts Centre and some of the infrastructure and some of the priorities that we want around our waterfront, for example. So we expect that to come back, and we expect further debate, too, when we get that report. Okay? Councillor Gardner?
I may be the wrong time to do this, but we need to add conferences to that too, because
right, so
well, maybe it's a little too much tonight, but it's a thought that has to be brought forward. AFMO will be an example of bringing people to the city. And we had a lady here tonight who suggested she loved this city because she came here. So the conferences will also be a part of our economic development.
So I fully expect the implementation plan to speak to the specifics, right?
Thank you.
So our strategic plan is our 5 pillars.
Yeah.
And we will see that come back. So there was a motion to approve, and I will say as amended, if that's okay. Right? So there's a motion to approve as amended and seconded, so all in favor? Okay, so folks, we have a strategic plan. And as I indicated to you at our last meeting, my intention now, this week if I can, or next week, is to circulate the strategic plan to all elected officials in this region and mayors and Akwesasne, because I would like their strategic plans in return. I would like their comments, and I would hope that as a result of that sharing of strategic plans, that we also that this leads to a meeting. A regional meeting, SDG Akwesasne, around priorities. We've all gone through it. Every council has done their strategic plan, and so why don't we talk about it? I don't like dusty documents. We don't want this one to be dusty, or anybody else's in this region to be dusty documents. So I will be sharing that, and I will keep you posted as to feedback and maybe the setting up of a regional meeting. Thank you. Next item.
The next item are purchasing policies, recommending that council adopt the procurement of goods and/or services policy and the supplier discipline policy as presented.
Councillor Gardner.
Motion.
We move to adopt the procurement policy, seconded by Councillor Elaine McDonald. Debate? Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, recently we put out a tender, I think it may not have been an RFP, but there was an issue that the Architects Association of Ontario had an issue with it, claiming it didn't follow their own guidelines. It was actually 2 of ours. So I want to make sure, like, as we adopt these policies, like we discussed this prior to that happening, we want to make sure that we're not going to run into an instance where we adopt this and we're going to run into a professional organization that says your tender doesn't really follow our guidelines for our members.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So whenever we issue an RFP and a tender, there is opportunities for questions and feedback to come back from proponents that are potentially bidding. So specifically with an RFP, we allow for many questions, and then at times, depending on what those questions are, there may be items that are brought to light that might cause us to hit pause on the RFP. We might need to redraft it. We might need to come back with more information so that everybody can respond. So in that particular situation, the city is reviewing it, so we have stopped that RFP as it stands in order to make sure that we are not issuing an RFP that is too restrictive, that is going to prevent capable firms from bidding on it. So we're going to take a slightly different approach with that RFP. But I don't believe that anything that is in these new policies would prevent us from still following that pattern of how we manage feedback that's coming in from an RFP that's been issued.
Follow-up?
Well, thank you for your answer, Madam CEO. Just so much as, they had issued a warning to their members saying these tenders don't follow our guidelines. So I just want to see that because in my opinion, it does damage to the reputation of the city. So if we can mitigate that, that's something I think we should be looking at.
Madam CEO.
Maybe if I could just elaborate a little bit more as well. When we issue an RFP, a lot of the concerns related to indemnification and insurance requirements. And sometimes when we're drafting our documents, we're getting advice potentially from our insurers because they help us with the type of insurance we would want to protect ourselves. Sometimes we may engage in some benchmarking to see what other municipalities are doing. But in some of these situations, I think what's even more effective is we probably should be engaging our own legal counsel. So we've had legal counsel take a look at that RFP, and they have agreed that there are components in there that are too restrictive for those components to be able to take on that risk and be responsible for. So in that situation, it's probably a bit of a, I'm going to say, learning exercise that we went through with that specific RFP. We are now engaging with legal counsel to make sure that we deal with those concerns and have something that's out there that can be properly bid on by competitive firms, and we're not restricting, because the last thing that we want to do is restrict companies or proponents from being able to bid that we should be seeking bids from for these projects.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Councillor Bergeron, then Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think through the course of my first 9 months, I've been pretty vocal on this process that I find a little frustrating, that we get an RFP at the last second, well, not the last second, through the process that is established, and then we have to approve it, or there's legal repercussions. I find that fundamentally flawed. And personally, I would love to see, and I mentioned this when our legal counsel was here, I would love to see RFPs come to us perhaps in camera, perhaps before they actually go out. I don't know what that process is. I don't see it in this, and so I suppose I'm opposed to it in general, ultimately, because I fundamentally think council has a role, an important role in defining the values of an RFP, that scoring configuration. We are not involved in that process right now, and we are not involved through the changes in this policy. So I'm going to oppose it for technical reasons, I suppose, and I would make a motion at a future council meeting to change that.
So we have a motion, so we're debating this motion to adopt. I did anticipate your question, Councillor Bergeron. I suspect that the CAO and the CFO did as well.
So when we had, through you, Madam Mayor, when we had legal counsel come in and do the presentation to council with respect to council's involvement with the terms of the RFP or that evaluation scoring mechanism, I think that that was discouraged, and I think that following practice of other municipalities, municipal councils do not get involved in those types of items. We have also done our own surveying of other municipalities to see what involvement their councils have in that process. So I think I'm going to also refer it to Mrs. Bailey to see if she'd like to add any comments, but those were some of the comments that we also received from David Sheriff Scott when we came in at the last meeting.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Those were his comments to council and to administration to keep the process separate from a governance perspective, keeping politicalness out of the process. It's not to say that before very large purchases that the city makes, that council couldn't be part of a discussion before the bid process starts. So there may be some information that we can come to council with regarding services and goods that are being purchased, where maybe not specifically terms of reference, but a discussion can take place so administration going into the procurement process can understand what council is looking for in purchasing those goods and services.
So I suspect this is where Councillor Bergeron wanted to go. Did you want to get back up on your feet, or?
Sure. I remain fully opposed based on the information received, because exactly of what she said. That is where we should be involved. I fundamentally believe that. Maybe that is against Ontario law, I don't know. But to me, council should be participating in that discussion, which I just heard, and we are not. We receive it at the end of the line. And so we have big, giant budget decisions to make when RFPs come to us, but it comes to us too late. We have to approve it. We heard it from our legal counsel. So I think there's a much bigger conversation to be had about what we just heard here, that we should be involved in that process. Maybe it's not approving the RFP. Maybe it's fundamentally helping out in what the goal of the RFP is. And I don't feel, in the 9 months I've been here, that that is what council does. And so I remain opposed to this.
That's fine,
Thank
but
you.
I'm going to allow Madam CFO to
Yeah,
respond.
of course.
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you. So I guess maybe I'll take a step back and say that probably council should not be involved in every RFP, but those that have a specific requirement for the city, larger RFPs that may be for 5 years or more. I know there's a few that the CAO and I have discussed that may be of particular interest, such as the pharmaceutical RFP, the recycling and waste collection RFP, the auditing RFP, but really there are only a handful that we could see that would probably come to council before to have a conversation on, to understand next steps in the procurement process.
Would it be possible to have a report on that, though? Because you say there's a handful, but you might be interested in having some guidelines around what those might look like, and so could that be the subject of a policy or a report so that we can debate those in particular? I mean, this is one thing, this policy, but everyone here remembers how we started this term. And it was difficult. So that's the kind of thing that we might want a separate report to address.
Sure, through you, Madam Mayor. We can take a report like that to council. It isn't part of this policy, though. It doesn't have to be. That report is separate,
and can be approved by council separately. This talks about the procurement process itself, that council is not involved in that process.
Thank you. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think also to Councillor Bergeron's comments, I'd like to reinforce that council decides levels of service. And so we need to make sure that if we are doing anything with respect to levels of service through that RFP process, that there's clear communication to council in advance. So to say we are proposing a slightly different level of service depending on what the item is. Also too, during a budget process, we should be talking about procurement of goods, such as, so not the policy, not the process, but what I'm hearing this evening through many of our discussions is we'll need to start to look at different types of vehicles, whether they're hybrid, electric. Those are the types of items that we should be talking about prior to issuing tenders or RFPs, so that we all clearly understand what the product is that we're buying or the service that we're looking for, and be able to properly put out public proposals for that, to receive bids and submissions, and then bring them back to council after we've put it through a proper process. So the process stays with administration, but the determination of what we want to procure and the levels of service, council should have input on.
Okay. I have Councillor Hollingsworth and then Councillor DePel.
Why not? Your Worship, if I might.
Yes.
It was always my understanding historically is that, just to clear something up for my own, that the beauty or the upside of an RFP as opposed to a tender is that council wasn't married to the low bid, or like this is the one you have to approve. You have some wiggle room with that. Is that changed, or have I misunderstood, or like an RFP gives the council or a board or whoever is approving it more wiggle room in terms of who they decide to pick, right?
Madam CFO is here.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and a tender is very specific.
Yes, low bid,
Low
done.
bid, right?
That's
And
it.
we give very specific specifications, and as long as the bid meets those specifications, low bid is awarded. In an RFP, there is different factors that are evaluated based on, and quite often we use RFPs for levels of service. So it could be engineering, consulting, it could be auditing, it could be any of those components, and we take into consideration more things than just price. Relevant experience with other municipalities that we deem to be comparable to what we're looking for. It could be the experience of the team and the individuals that are putting forward. It could be the company that, so it allows you to take a look at, you could have a really expensive, good proposal from a really, really good firm, but then you could also have a much more cost-effective proposal from a less experienced firm. So you go through components of that evaluation process to determine which proposal should be.
Okay, so the thing is, if we had an RFP tomorrow to paint City Hall, or the case may be, and it was an RFP, not a tender, it would go, correct me if I'm wrong, to some kind of administrative committee who would review that RFP and say, we recommend bid number 2. Is that kind of traditionally how it works with RFP? So then you present to council and you say, we've reviewed all the RFPs and we like bid number 2. But there's nothing really technically legally stopping us as a council, because we're ultimately the awarding body with the RFPs to say, no, we as a council like number 3 instead, right? So the point is the administrative committee can make a recommendation. Council on an RFP, because it has more wiggle room in terms of what you're weighing, and it's not just price. So the point is, council, the governing body, could say, no, we've changed it, we don't like number 2. You do, we don't, we want 3. And not technically face any legal repercussions, because RFPs are all about what, there's a little bit of touchy-feely in the sense that what you've decided to score is not necessarily what we decided to score.
Who's
Does that
taking
make
this,
sense?
who's taking this one?
Whomever, they look like they're chomping at the bit. Your
They
worship.
both are, they both are.
They're
So
jumping right over the table at me here.
So let's let them talk.
So the RFP document is very specific about what the process is, how it's going to be evaluated, and a committee that is put together that does that evaluation through a consensus approach. As long as that process has been followed and a recommendation has come forward to council, I would argue that council is under the obligation to award to the recommendation from administration, because we have followed that process based on the document that we issued for the RFP.
So then why are we even-
there is no wiggle room.
Why would we even technically approve either RFPs or tenders when, once administration has said this is what we're doing? Why are we even doing anything then? We don't get to have really any say in terms of the RFP process at the outset, at the beginning. We don't get any opinion at the RFP process during, and now, which I'm not really legally able to argue with you, and really have no real official say. Why would we even have it on our agendas? Let's just have the administrative committee approve it and save ourselves 20 minutes of debate time, right?
So
I
we
mean,
did,
in essence, that's what-
have this debate while BLG was here, David Sheriff's.
Yeah, but the point
So
is,
I
your worship, forgive me, is that if our CAO is telling us what is true legally, then it's just oops. Let's just save ourselves some time. Don't even put it on the agenda. Let us know through an email or something what administration has decided, and we'll answer questions accordingly. Is that not
So, Madam
ultimately
CAO
how it's shaking itself out?
Madam CEO, you want to maybe go over what it is that David Sheriff Scott told us?
And I'm trying to grasp it, your worship, in light of the discussion.
So from, through you, Madam Mayor, from a governance perspective, it's our recommendation that based on the limits set out in the report, that these items do come forward to council to approve through a council meeting. There are some municipalities, not many, but there are some municipalities that do not take purchasing reports to their council. So I believe Kingston is an example. They do not put any purchasing items on their council agenda unless it's items that were not budgeted for. So it would have to fit into an exception scenario, and then that would be brought forward to council. But I would say that typically many municipalities, certainly our size, would bring purchasing items to council to award. It's a way as well for council to be informed. It's a way for the community to be informed, to have them on our agenda. So it's a transparent process. It is a bit of a governance process. Council is overseeing that process of administration.
Good. That being said, 2 points. Technically speaking, if I completely grasped the report, there's a little kind of a provision in there suggesting that tenders no longer be added to the agenda. Tenders, low bid. Because low bid, and quite frankly, I don't have a problem with that part, your worship, because that is painfully cut and dried. Low bid gets the job. That's it. There's really no debate on that, and there shouldn't be, quite frankly. Otherwise, you reconfigure how things are done. Did I get that correctly, or have I misread it?
Madam CFO?
Through you, Madam Mayor, any procurement the city does that's over the CAO's limit, $150,000, no matter what instrument the city uses, will come to council for
Right.
approval. What we're doing differently for tenders is that they're no longer opened in public.
Fair enough. The last thing, your worship, that I'd like to ask is that in essence, this is a policy. Council, it's a council policy, right? Like we're approving what we as a council have decided we wanted based on recommendations through legal and whatever else. However, is it safe to say that we as a council can change or amend or reconfigure any provision of that policy technically at any time through motion and simple majority vote?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, so if council would like to see a policy amended, then that is certainly within council's authority to do so. If it's with respect to our procurement policy, depending on what you wanted to amend, if we thought that it would make sense to also obtain some legal background for council to consider, depending on what you're thinking about changing, we might do that, but the policy can be changed at any time on council's direction.
Simply, I guess my point, your worship, as wearing, like, as one member, as it stands, it seems like a reasonably solid policy. Clearly, my colleague and I maybe aren't completely sold on some provisions of it, but I'm certainly not going to hold up the process based on, like, I don't really know what I'm talking about yet. So when I finally figure out what it is I want, I'll let you know, type of thing, assuming I can get a seconder and all that stuff. But for the most part, I think it's a reasonably sound policy, and I'll support it as its current configuration.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor DePel and then Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So after our last council meeting with the legal team here, and with no disrespect, I thought that was a waste of taxpayers' monies to bring him here, because at the end of the day, you're told you really don't have a say in it and you have to go with what's being presented. What I have an issue with is that whenever we're elected to be here to make decisions for the city, yet we can't even get, when we, and I've experienced this myself with the pharmaceutical contract, that I couldn't even get information of what that scoring mechanism looked like. So how? Because they can't share that with us either. So I really have a hard time with wondering why we're even approving them. What do you need our approval for if it's a go no matter what? I haven't got that since the whole pharmacy issue, and I still don't get that because I'm not understanding. If it's operational, I don't approve the phone bill that goes through here, City Hall, so why am I approving this? To me, it's like it's a done deal, and why doesn't shouldn't council have the right to say to administration, you're coming to us and you're asking, or could there be an avenue where administration comes and says, we have this, or set limits at anything over this, we come to you, you say whether you want it as a tender or an RFP. We don't even get that. We don't even get, it comes on the agenda, and we must have, as soon as I see RFP, I don't even read them now, because I know that you can't vote no. So I don't, or without being told you're going to be sued. So I just don't understand why council has no say in that, and why we don't even get a discussion at an in-camera session of whether or not council would be happier if it went with a tender versus an RFP, what the benefits are. And I think we're taking a lot of administration's time up to write these big reports on these RFPs when it's a done deal before we even arrive at the council chambers. So I have never gotten it, I still don't get it, and I probably won't get it. So, because to me it makes no sense as to why it's even coming to us. Because if it's considered operational or administrative, then they should be doing it automatically without us, and then I guess we can ask questions at the end of a budget season as to what this was or what that was, because now we're not balanced, that we don't have a balanced budget, or we have a balanced budget. But I don't get it. And I realize we brought him in, but to me that was a waste of people's time and a waste of resources and a waste of expenses, because at the end of the day, we have absolutely no say on behalf of the residents of Cornwall when it comes to awarding an RFP.
Thank you, Councillor DePaul. Councillor Gardner and then Councillor Bennett.
I'm going to preface this by suggesting that I support everybody's opinion around the table. Whether I agree with it or not, I support their opinions. What I have a problem with now, according to what was said by the lawyers, we have legal regulations that we have to work by. What my fear is that we begin to micromanage, and I do not want this council to be micromanaging what administration is doing. We either trust our administration or we don't. They're working on regulations, so are we. I have an issue with not trusting our administration. We have professionals that went to school and learned, and they come back with what we need to know as a council to make decisions. My opinion only. You all have your own opinion.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Councillor Bennett and then Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I remember having this conversation before we were sworn in your office, and my only concern, my only really concern there was, when we're talking about RFPs that are level of service RFPs, or something that's of a very large sum of money, I don't think the approval at the end of it is the point. I think the discussion at the beginning of it is where we should be having this conversation. So if it's the garbage contract, because that's where we started. Now, that whole thing started before we were sworn in, so that might be not the right way to go to, but a contract like that, if we're gonna go to an RFP for that, I would think, I'd be more comfortable voting on that if at the very beginning we had a discussion about, okay, we're gonna go to RFP for waste, garbage collection. You have any concerns? You have anything you wanna see in it? You have anything you don't wanna see in it? And so when that tender comes back to us, it would hopefully have those concerns addressed before it even went out. That's kind of what I'm thinking of. I don't care less about a lot of the tenders that go out and come back. They don't affect the day-to-day operation of people. The garbage does. Spending $50 million on something might. So I think if we had some guidelines on what type of RFPs should we be discussing before they go out. Something that's a level of service, absolutely. Just to try and fix it after the fact isn't going to happen. So if some of us have an opinion, there's a lot of things I don't know anything about, but there's a lot of things I do, and everybody has their own talents. So if we have a meeting before a large levels of service RFP goes out, and somebody around here has some knowledge on that, and might be able to give a good idea, or might have something we should be looking for in the RFP, I think that's the time to discuss it. I have no problem once it gets here, and we have to vote for it for legal reasons, whatever. But if it's that important, then we should. I look like Andre with this pen here. I have. Sorry, I was clicking it. I just think that's the time where we should be discussing it and having an opinion on it, so that when something like the garbage contract gets voted on, and we're taking it on the chin, one way or the other, from the public, we could at least say, well, at the beginning of the process, we had to say on it, and this is what we tried to do, and we either couldn't do it or we could do it. But at least we had the conversation before, and now we're not just saying, because when it happens after the fact, we're defending everybody. Like it or not, we get the phone calls. I'm sure you get the phone calls too, but for level of service RFP, I just would like to see us have the opportunity to discuss it, to give some opinions on it before it goes out, so that when it does come back, we have no problems voting on something we have no choice to vote on. That's all I'm trying to say.
Right.
Thank you.
And I believe Madam CAO and Madam CFO were addressing that as well. Did you want to add anything, Madam CFO?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I want to say that I absolutely agree. If we're issuing a fairly significant, or if we're planning to issue a fairly significant RFP, we should be, or a tender, if we are changing anything like that, or if we're looking at, especially if it's a 7-year contract, we should be soliciting feedback from council. So, and that should be done up front. But then once we've determined what that level of service should be, then from that point, that is administration's role to take that document, determine how to put it together in a package, evaluate it, and then come back to council with recommendations.
I agree with you 100%.
So, Councillor Bennett, we're going to continue the speaking list. We've already had a mover and seconder for this, and then we'll call the vote. If afterwards a councillor, such as yourself potentially, might want to make a motion to request a report from administration on that very issue around when council can be involved up front, I would only be too happy to entertain such a motion.
Let's do that.
Okay. So then I have Councillor Grant and Councillor Hébert on the list.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To save time, I would echo exactly what Councillor Bennett said, but he said it much better than I would have. So I think if we do get that motion asking for a report, I think it would be good It would help us as a council understand where we can fit into the role. Excuse me.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Councillor Back.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I too want to say ditto to Councillor Bennett's potential motion, which we may see sooner rather than later. However, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like administration has already been making an effort to keep us a little bit more in the loop beforehand than maybe in the past. Am I wrong? Has this happened recently? I can't recall of a specific tender or anything like that, but I feel like it has happened recently where they're already hearing us and they're doing it already. So am I correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, probably not me to respond with the CAO, but I know that we have put in a process that we're introducing a topic to council, and then council is seeing and making a decision at a future meeting. Maybe it's not specific to procurement, but
Okay,
definitely it is a
right.
process.
So I'm seeing administration come to us with other items before we're to make a decision, and I'm liking that. So if we need a motion to make that specifically to tenders, RFPs, I'd support that as well. I would also support just keeping them on the agenda for transparency. Yes, I feel like the rest of you are all sort of rubber stamping them, and we'll all go to court if we start voting against tenders, but they're nice to be there for the community to see what we're voting on, what we're approving, what's been approved, who's bid, et cetera, et cetera. So for transparency, it's good to have them there. I'm also wondering, because we're usually just approving all of them, would it be appropriate to put them all under consent, one vote, like we do with bylaws? So voting on tenders, item 1 to 10, all in favor, the end.
Madam CAO.
So through you, Madam Mayor, yes, the clerk and I have talked about that, and the clerk has recommended that in the past.
Okay.
We are coming back to council in November with some suggested changes to the procedural bylaw.
Okay.
So those are the types of components that we can put in there. We also want to try and take a look at like components that might help move a meeting along a little bit more quickly. So something like that we could certainly have included in some potential changes for council's consideration for the changes in the procedural bylaw.
Perfect. I'm sure that'd save us a good 15 minutes or so almost every meeting, so all of us could yammer on about other things. Excellent. Thank you.
Councillor Mack.
Maybe I'm misreading this, but is a bone of contention the point system, that we do not know how the point system works, that there's a system out there, you get so many points for each thing? We're not aware of the system, point system. I thought I heard that.
Madam CAO.
Through you, Madam Mayor, so we would issue an RFP. We tell in the RFP the points awarded to the various categories. What we do not do is we do not share the scoring of those proponents individually with council.
Of course, we don't know the scoring, we don't know the point system. If I gather too, some of my colleagues want to get involved in how the RFP before it goes out. And I'm just wondering if that would be, here's what we want as a point system. Could we do that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think that if there's something that is of concern of council or something that we're looking at changing, or, maybe that would come up through that type of conversation. But I would say typically, it would not be our recommendation, our intention to have council get involved in all of those. Like, the city does issue many RFPs. We issue.
I think we're talking about big ones there.
Yes, but kind of getting back to some of the conversation brought forward by Councillor Bennett, we're taking a look at if we're taking a look at any type of RFP that might be for a significant service, a certain number of years, there might be items that council may want changed in the level of service through that conversation, and we might have to think about whether or not we're changing how we're evaluating from a weighting perspective. So it could be there's a bigger environmental component.
Yeah.
Right?
What would be your response if we're in a closed meeting, we're discussing the RFP, and we're saying here, and somebody said, gee whiz, we should get 5 points for somebody being from Cornwall?
So we cannot.
That's not allowed. That's where,
It's
okay.
against the law.
Okay, so if we ever, point system, if you came back and said, Z company is the guy we go with, and somebody said, well, B, really, he's from Cornwall, so he should get it, that would be totally legal, and we'd be sued.
Everybody's spoken. Councillor Lane.
Thank you. I tried not to, honestly.
I saw you taking notes, I knew you were coming.
I keep coming back to something David Sheriff Scott said, and he said it 3 times. He said an RFP is a solution and a price. Do you remember that? So in the context of our discussion, if we were early on invited to discuss the terms of an RFP, like if we were given the opportunity to help formulate the question or the problem to which the RFP is the solution, I think that would be great. But I think that would be great, and maybe not much farther than that, because when it comes to evaluating it, I mean, let's face it, there's a certain educational level required to be able to evaluate what the best plan is for a $50 million wastewater treatment or whatever. Like, there's a certain point where our opinions are important because we channel the residents to some extent. But the fact is, when it comes time to evaluate some of the proposals that come to us, like, we don't have the kind of education and training it takes to be able to evaluate, I think, the material that comes in. So I think we can have an early on responsibility, but I think at the end of the day, like, I'm comfortable having the experts advise me of the best call to make, and I'll raise my hand when I hear it. And I hope that's not just because I don't want to do any more homework that I'm already doing. I don't think it is. I think it's just a question of, we have our roles, and obviously administration has their roles, and the only thing that I know we can get sued for if we screw up on is the water quality. But I mean, if a road goes awry or a bridge falls down, we're not the ones whose reputations are on the line. It's actually admin, so sleep on that one. You know? Anyway, a solution, that's a wonderful thought for what an RFP is.
Everyone has spoken. So the night that David Sheriff Scott was here, it was a long discussion. I agree, Councillor DePel, very involved. After that discussion, I had a chat with a colleague who's a resident of Cornwall, and we chatted for an hour. Like, we were totally into that discussion. We were policy wonks, so it was great. And there are a few out there who appreciate that. So I will always favor that we have more information than not. Some people are not into it, some people will not get it, but it's about transparency. And so the reason we had David Sheriff Scott here in the open was about transparency. And yeah, sometimes it's difficult, but to me, having all of these items on an agenda, consent or otherwise, means that if somebody cares to pick up an agenda, they see that it's there. They have questions about it, they can ask somebody, because they know about it. So I will always be in favor of keeping it on an agenda and having public access to it. That being said, I'm going to support this, and I just want to highlight the fact that there is an environmental paragraph in that policy as well, that we didn't have before and that we fleshed out somewhat, and gives us some a little bit more guidance in terms of how we can be better stewards of the environment in the way that we purchase. So that was appreciated. So I'm going to call for the vote and then see if there are any other motions that are going to come after our discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councillor Bennett.
Why never made a motion? I'd like to make a motion to ask for a report on what types of RFPs should come before council for feedback, such as levels of service or large financial impacts, before going out to the public for a tender or for RFP.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Bergeron? Did you get that motion, Madam Clerk?
I got the gist of it. Perhaps you could send it to me.
Sure.
Any further debate on that motion? All in favor? Carried. Next item.
Municipal Grants Program. The action recommended is that council provide direction for the administration of the Municipal Grants Program for the City of Cornwall.
Councillor DePel?
I'll move it.
You move it. Councillor Hubert seconds. Any discussion on this? Yes, Councillor Hubert and then Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before I provide any input, I'd like to say I don't believe I have a conflict of interest here. I do have a colleague across the table who has declared conflict because his agency receives funds. My agency, my employer also receives funds from the city, but not through any grant process. It is a budget line within a department, and so I feel I can still speak to these items as I do not apply for grants. Just putting that out there. There is an item within this report. Is that okay?
Sorry, Councillor Hubert.
Madam Mayor, if I may.
Yeah.
The recommendation is asking for direction.
Yes, what do we want?
Right, yeah, so there's no motion yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
you just said we're.
So
Okay.
can we debate before we?
Let's debate before we get direction.
Okay.
So are you okay with the comments about
Yeah, sorry. I
disclosure of
just
interest? Okay, go ahead.
Didn't want anybody to get upset. So there's a point with it in the report that mentions, different funding streams from other municipalities that have been surveyed about different grant programs. And one of them is community partners, and I want to ask a little bit more about that because I'm not finding any additional information about those funding streams. Is that in reference to potentially donating to foundations, community foundations, and having the grant process be done through other agencies? I know other communities have done that through community foundations where they say, here's $50,000 a year, make sure that a portion of your grantees are coming from the city of Cornwall and hit these 3 check boxes. Is that what that means?
So let me go to Madam CFO.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So municipalities do receive funding for municipal grant programs. So the city supports municipal grants through its tax base, and we've seen other municipalities receive funds, and we've called them from community partners. It could be their local utility company. It could be any source of funding outside of the municipality itself.
Okay. So I guess my question is, were any of the communities surveyed, or any communities that you may be aware of that do this in the opposite direction, where they give an amount of money to a foundation, knowing that that foundation will address some of the needs that our current grant stream addresses?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. We have seen that the grants application process has gone through a review committee, and some municipalities actually have like their local arts council. They provide an envelope of funding, and that operates like a committee, but they're in care and control of those funds for the program.
Okay. So I wouldn't be completely opposed to investigate that option a little deeper. I think this is a really outdated process, the way we have been doing it. I think there's no real evaluation process. We get a list of agencies that have applications that are completely different from each other. You know, most grant applications are very specific. We've written a few recently where you have certain criteria, you have to answer them, and that makes it easier to compare. The applications we receive come in all kinds of formats, and so it's hard for us to compare. And then at the same time, we're not really comparing. We're doing it in public forum, so it's hard to say, well, this one's better than this one, and you know, this one deserves a bit of funding, but this one doesn't. I've never applied for a grant that was debated in a public forum. So I think that's something that we need to consider if we are going to continue doing it. I like the idea of a committee with lay members. It's not just council choosing the grant recipients, but I do believe this is an unfair process, and either we hand it off to somebody else or we find a set amount, because that's another situation. Every year we're sort of figuring out, well, what did we give last year? Let's try to give less than we gave last year, which is not always the greatest way to support our communities. If we found a set amount and we provided a community agency who does this kind of work already, then maybe that's a way that we can continue contributing. But washing our hands of it, because like I said, I think it's a very outdated process. I continue to support the in-kind. I think a lot of agencies depend on that. It's not necessarily costing us money. I know there are staff time and resources, but I think it's one way we can contribute to a lot of great nonprofit work that's happening and bringing tourism and bringing people to the city without it really making a huge impact to our budget. So I would continue, I'd love to continue accepting those applications, but I'm interested in seeing what other members of council are interested in reviewing, because I think it's time.
So hold on to some thoughts, because I'm going to be looking for a motion at some point. So, because the recommendation is just provide direction.
Yeah, got it.
Okay, Councillor Hollingsworth and then Councillor Grant.
Your worship, back in the dark ages of City Hall, when I used to skulk around the room, this particular debate was going on then, back in 91 and 92 and 93 and all of that kind of thing. My problem with the whole grant process, as I think I'm getting it, like, let me ask a question, and I'm not even sure who I'm asking this to. Right now, there really isn't any set criteria to give a group, an outside group, money, right? They just simply apply, and like, we don't have like, you have to do A, B, and C to have even a chance of getting a grant. You fill out an application, tell us how much you want. Administration does, when in fairness, they put it on the budget, and then we, as a council, try to haggle amongst ourselves to determine whether we're prepared to give them the money or not. Does that not seem to be how it works?
Madam CFO?
Through you, Madam Mayor. There is some criteria in the policy about who can apply through the grants program. They need to be a nonprofit organization. There is criteria in the policy that there's 4 different types of grants.
I've seen that part.
Through the policy. So we do follow the policy. And then there are reporting back requirements when funding is approved. But you are correct that we don't have a larger scope in our policy about what types of funds for
Right.
innovation, as an example. We saw that in other policies, that there may be a set amount of money set aside for regular operating type grants for nonprofit organizations, but there may be $25,000 set aside in this same envelope for innovation. And those types of applications would come to their review committee, et cetera.
Thank you. The problem, Your Worship, is if we just put a chunk of money and then said, okay, come to council and apply for it or make a presentation, we'd probably be inundated with everybody looking for money, and they'd all probably be good causes and worthwhile and all things that we would like to have, but there is a finite amount of money out there. I think, Your Worship, in terms of direction, my gut feeling is almost to say, let's just kind of get out of the grant business, period, which takes all of the so-called, I mean, there's a certain measure of political lobbying, and that somebody who has a cause calls up certain councillors and says, you know, we're really important to the city, and I'm sure they are, but then it gets us back here to sort of willy-nilly and randomly trying to allocate money. Last year, it seemed that the budget process, we had kind of a min put a chunk in, and then we sort of tried to finagle our way through it. It just seemed so painful and so arbitrary, and I don't know how to not make it arbitrary. And so, to me, if we can't be like fair and easy for people to figure out if they're going to get money or not ahead of time, then perhaps we should just kind of get out of the business. Or at the very least, really we need to, and I know admin is saying, well, that's what we want from you. I don't have the answer either, but I think we have to make it more cut and dried. If you meet this criteria, you get the money, and if you don't, you don't, rather than us debating it. So, because I don't have an answer, I guess if admin's looking for something, I appreciate that. My gut is to say, let's just kind of get out of this, and, I don't know, start all over, but I think my gut feeling is to say, get out, we're out of this business, you know, good luck. At the very minimum, Your Worship, maybe one-time seed money perhaps would maybe be the only thing I'd be interested in. We have a brand-new thing we're starting. We need $5,000 or $10,000 to get up and running, and you'll never see us again. Thank you very much. That, if admin's looking for something from one particular counselor, that would probably be about the only thing I would be interested in considering, because then we can weight it. Okay, we'll get you started, then you kind of have to survive on your own a little bit. So I think in terms of direction, that would be probably the only thing I would support right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Grant and then Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to put a motion to defer this to our next meeting. I'm not prepared to discuss it this evening. There's certain aspects of this that I haven't really studied well enough. This is a big document this weekend, and this grant process we've discussed for ages. And I know I like to have a review committee, and there's other aspects I like there, but I'm not prepared to discuss that tonight, and I apologize that I'm not ready, but, so I'm making a motion.
Defer is always in order. Councillor Towndale second, so on the motion to defer, Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, Councillor Grant beat me to it, but maybe for a different reason. Part of the reason I was going to make a motion to defer is because the current application process for community grants is open for another couple days, another 6 days, I believe. So we'd be discussing this while the current process is ongoing. No?
No, so we have not opened up that process, understanding that council would like to review
Okay.
the grant application. So there's no deadline right now. And if we do open up the program to allow applications, we'll make sure that we allow a reasonable time period for those applications to be put forward. So there's nothing out there on the website.
Okay. Well, I stand corrected, but I do support the motion to defer all the same. This is a big decision, and while we could, I think we all I've already heard several different opinions on how we should handle this, which obviously means there's going to be a greater debate. So I think it's something we need to absorb and come back with and have a greater debate at that time, quite frankly.
Thank you, Councillor Towndale. Councillor McIntosh?
I agree. I have some ideas about something Dean talked about, one or two times, come up to the plate and then you're gone. It's a crazy system because we gather here, it's a one-day system, and we all make side deals, give them, sure. We're often talking about that. Somebody needs 10,000. Well, we only got, first of all, there's only so much money in the envelope. So you give and take, it happens, you did it. Nothing illegal about it, just that's the way politics works. But anyway, I'd like to see it sit down, and here's the framework of it. And I think Carrie Lane alluded to one time, maybe we have an ad hoc committee, organize this, but there's an envelope of money. A committee sits down and says, okay, 5 to them, 10 to them, 4 to them, or 20 to them, and if it's over 10,000, that's it. It's seed money. You're on your own after that. And 15 or 10 years from now, you can go back and apply. The system really needs to be renovated.
It's a house.
So I have no more speakers on the list, and I'd like to see with Madam CAO how do we want to proceed here? Does administration want to receive comments from council in the interim until this goes back onto another agenda? How do you want to proceed with this deferral?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And so I was going to ask if there would be an opportunity, if anybody had any feedback and they want to provide it to either myself or Mrs. Bailey. One other item that's in the report that I think we saw in some other municipalities that I think council should consider if they're going to have a grant program is to have 2 intakes. So that will allow for an opportunity for applications that might come in the second half of the year that might have something that, so we saw years ago quite often a request for something in the winter. And so what would end up happening is that application, if it didn't come in the fall of a full year and a half previous, because the budget process often doesn't get approved until, February, March, or April. Sometimes there's applications that are more time sensitive to the winter and it wasn't known the full year prior. So by maybe having multiple intakes, so if you looked at having applications done, taking applications twice a year, or you can take a look at different things that may come up through the year. It's a consideration only. I would like to make sure that council's aware that both Tracy and myself would be available for any type of discussion, any questions. If there's any other information we can provide to you, if there's anything you would like us to research, we can try and look into that as well, because I think we certainly understand the frustration with that application process. It is quite timely. So if there's anything we can do to help streamline it, make it a little bit more focused, we're happy to do so.
Councillor McDonald?
Just a question. I'm going to support the deferral. In the interim, if somebody should have a question about the grant program, who would be the point person that we'd refer them to?
Tracy.
Tracy. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so before I call the vote on the deferral, so I will encourage councillors to communicate with Ms. Bailey to provide ideas. It might also be interesting to have maybe a little bit more in terms of recommendations. I mean, there are different options, so we can get out of the business entirely. We can set up a review committee. As Councillor Hébert said, we can put it out to a third party. I mean, maybe we need a little bit of, some of those ideas will come to you, and maybe we need a supplemental report with some of those ideas to give us a framework. Okay. Everybody in favor of the deferral? Against? Carried. Thank you.
The next report is the renaming of Riverdale Park, recommending that that council not approve the renaming of Riverdale Park.
So I have Councillor Towndale and then Councillor Grant.
You want a motion?
Yeah, well, is that what you were gonna?
Yeah, I was gonna move that motion, Madam Mayor.
So you're making the motion too?
I'm moving the recommendation.
Make sure I have it here. So the recommendation is that council not approve the renaming of Riverdale Park, moved by Councillor Towndale, seconded by Councillor McIntosh. Debate. Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Certainly a passionate issue. Riverdale Park. There's been a lot of public commentary. To be fair, I wish we would have had access to the ones that were mailed in by email to the clerk. I didn't have a chance to see any of those. But I did see a lot of debate on social media and received some messages from people and verbal discussions as well. I grew up in Riverdale. I spent a lot of time in Riverdale Park. Remember, I have a lot of fond memories there. And I can appreciate people's attachment to it. You know, when we initially looking at it, figured, well, you know, it's named for the neighborhood, it's named for the road, but that name means something. So I appreciate all the feedback received, because I don't think we should change the name of the park, because people show that they have an attachment to it, and I think that's important. Jerry Grant was a friend of mine. He was. I got to know the man when I moved back home through his. We were in the same organization together, and through his volunteerism and other organization, through other organizations in the community. But at the same time, I am not in favor of renaming Riverdale Park for him. I think his achievements are very notable. He's a World War II veteran. He's been a community volunteer for I don't know how many decades. And he was a city councilor, but you know, that kind of took the precedent. That's how it was sold. But it's not just because he was a politician. He was quite a man. I think you know, it was brought up that there was another Grant Park. I realized it was named more so for that part of Riverdale. It's not a separate subdivision, but at the time it was considered like an extension. Same for the street, and the developer put it in. That is theoretically, I think, considered an unnamed park as well. I could be wrong, but I'd be in favor of naming Grant Park to Jerry Grant Park. I know that sounds funny in a sense, it's already named Grant Park, but I think it would reduce confusion. And as long as that's an unnamed park, I think we still get a chance to honor Jerry, but at the same time, we're not going to rename Riverdale Park. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Towndale. Councillor Grant?
I guess I put my hand up to second it, but I had enough comments on this issue from, and passionate comments. And to me, Riverdale Park is historic. I remember when I was a boy, it was a thrilled to go to Riverdale Park because that's where all the good-looking girls were. So they shunned us because we were from the other side of the tracks. Anyway, there's a lot of emotion with this, and I've known Jerry for a long, long time. We were on different committees together, and he's a great man. But I'm sure there's other opportunities coming up, and I would support those opportunities when they come up. Thank you.
Any other comment on this? Councillor Matt?
Another system that's badly flawed when it comes to naming things. It really is. You know, I've been, for 5 or 6 years now, Bob Turner, I keep being told reasons why we can't name this after him, we can't name that after him. And I'm going through a list today of people we don't name things after. John Sandfield MacDonald lived on York Street, first Premier of Ontario. Where in Cornwall can you find a John Sandfield MacDonald street, park, laneway, anything? Nothing. Nathan Phillips grew up, not born, he came here when he was 2 years old, raised on York Street too, graduate of Cornwall, Central Public School, graduate of Cornwall Collegiate. All Toronto did was name a city hall after him and a park. Cornwall, is there anything named after Nathan Phillips? No. People say, he's from Cornwall? You know, it's crazy. You know, I think of people like Mary Mack, first female sit around this table. Nothing named after her. Not even a suggestion. Another one, Beth Davison, the first female leader of the Cornwall District Labour Council. Another person to be a candidate. Jeanine Poirier, Ryan Gosling. He one of Cornwall's best promoters. He's been on Jay Leno. He was on 3 or 4 other talk shows. Loves talking about his days in Cornwall. Another guy we could suggest. There's so many other people we could, but there's no, it's like somebody shows up here and got an idea and we run with it, you know. There's got to be a system set up where a priority list is set up where we, you know, take care of those names before we get down to the rest of them. And, you know, until something's named after Bob Turner, I'm going to be very hesitant to name anything in this city after somebody because, believe me, that's I'm really struggling with that one because and you are too,
I am.
Madam Mayor. Anyway, I oppose this. We got so many other prominent, nationally known people. New Zealand alone was another one. But anyway, we need to get a system here where we don't have this discussion. And the other thing too is that I'm really opposed to discussing this in public. I think it should be, if we're going to discuss a name, I'd like to have somebody tell me why we close the door when we have lay appointment committee meetings. Because we're discussing individuals. We do the same here when it comes to naming things. Anyway, I'll oppose this one.
Anybody else on this? Councillor Bergeron?
Thank you. I just want to echo Councillor Towndale's words. And Councillor McIntosh, there is quite a long list. There is a problem in the process. I made the motion, I think, or supported the motion to bring it here for open conversation. I think all of these kind of matters should be public and open conversation. So I think we disagree on that. But I'm absolutely in favor of leaving it as Riverdale Park in this instance here. But I do think we absolutely need to relook at how we go about naming things. There's a long list of even hockey players that you didn't mention. I know you're a big hockey fan. That could be on that list. So that's up to us to come back with a committee or something. And so I'll give that some thought. But as it goes to the motion on the table, I support. Thank you.
Yeah, my understanding, Councillor Mack, is that you support the motion.
Yeah, I'm supporting the recommendation.
Okay, I'm just making clear. Anybody else on this? So, of course, we're going to call the vote in a minute. If anybody wants to make a motion after this to review the policy in place, I would be only too happy to entertain such a motion. So I will look to some councillors for that. I will say this, I sat on this committee to make this decision and this recommendation, and it was difficult. I too know Jerry Grant, knew Jerry Grant, and did admire him. It's difficult to have this kind of conversation, and it was difficult for our committee to review that, but it was the issue of the comments and the comments supporting the Riverdale neighborhood feel. This is what the committee was looking at when they made their initial decision. Hard to do, but that's what we were looking at. Was the feeling that Councillor Towndale described about what Riverdale Park means from a neighborhood perspective. Councillor Mack, I support you in your endeavor to name something after Bob Turner, and we'll always support you. So, let's do something there. And as soon as you say Ryan Gosling, you know, I'm a goner. I'm a goner. Full disclosure. So, let's take a look at reviewing this policy, and I'm looking forward to having further discussions. So, on this motion, all in favor? Against? Councillor Mack?
I'd like to make a motion that we set up, not a task force, but a committee of maybe 5 people, a couple of councillors and 3 lay people, to come up with a list of names, a priority list, and we go from there. And maybe once a year we can name something after somebody or whatever. I also think we should say to developers who are still talking to us that when you build a subdivision, you might consider this name.
Okay, so where you're going there is broad.
No,
right?
I'm going to
So-
just stick with the committee. That was just a afterthought.
Okay, but you also talked earlier about whether we talk about this in private or not.
Oh,
So-
well-
So your comments are broader than just that.
Well, I'm
So
just sticking to the committee. They're not going to meet in public. They, like all committees.
Right, but what policy are they going to use to make that decision once they're in city committee?
I would like to see them develop one, it has to be some, naming a park, that's a big thing, or a street. That's and we just need to be, the way we're doing it, just willy-nilly. It's,
Okay.
I've been disappointed in the past, the way we've handled it around this council table. Like if somebody shows up, makes a motion, second it, off we go.
So I see that.
There should be a
Madam
vetting,
Clerk, try and
a vetting.
catch my attention, so I'd like Madam Clerk to speak.
Madam Mayor, I think what I'm hearing is that you're asking for a review of the policy?
Oh, definitely.
Is that what you're,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that what your motion is?
I guess we could, who's going to do the review? That's the thing.
Administration of the policy.
Well, I mean, technically a policy is drafted and it comes back to council for debate.
Okay,
So
why
it's a
why don't
council-
we ask administration, I'll back it up, ask administration to come back with a proposal for a review, how we're going to handle these names, or how we're going to move forward with naming civic
Is there a seconder for that?
facilities.
Councillor Towndale?
Is that too complicated?
Madam Clerk?
It's late.
Okay, so there's debate on this motion for a report on a new policy. You want administration to bring
Yeah,
back a new
bring
policy?
back something. We know how they feel about the in-camera, out-of-camera thing, so.
Okay. Councillor McDonald?
Thank
And
you,
then
Madam
Councillor
Mayor.
Grant.
And I just want to say that initially my colleague mentioned he wanted a committee to draw up, I think, a list of names. I think that's maybe step 5. First step, let's establish the rationale for having naming.
So that's what this would be.
Yeah, good. So as long as we're that, let's be exhaustive and let's be broad and support the motion.
Councillor Grant?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, but procedurally, this is a new business motion, right?
Madam Clerk?
It is a new business motion, but it ties in with the
No, it's not
the
tied in.
subject matter.
No, it's not tied in at all. I disagree with you completely. It's not tied in.
Well, if it's a request for a report from administration, then is it in order, Madam Clerk? As a new business?
Yes.
New business motion, right. Having said that, since you've already agreed to it, et cetera, I think we have a committee in place right now, a commemorative committee.
Mm-hmm.
So why not just bring it back to that committee, because they deal with them, and if that fits the criteria of that, I know it's looking at naming them, but that committee could also look at the criteria for that. So we're not forming another committee. That's my add-on amendment to that new business motion.
Are you amending the motion, or you're not
Yes.
making a motion to?
Adding on to it. Because Matt talked about a committee, I'm just naming that committee.
Madam Clerk?
Your Worship, can we, point of
No, 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 no,
we
no,
get
no,
it,
I'm
just
not-
so I
no.
know what we're
Yeah,
debating, so I'm voting?
Right, so I'm going to the Madam Clerk.
So the original motion is to have a review of the naming policy. And Councillor Grant is probably suggesting an amendment, because you can't just add something to a motion.
I know, it's an amendment,
An
but you
amendment
talked
to,
about committee.
look at the existing committee as the committee that would review this.
Right.
So,
I need a seconder.
yeah. So the motion is to amend the motion on the floor from Councillor McIntosh. Seconder, Councillor Ibai?
No.
No. Councillor Gardner?
Yep, second.
Okay. So now the debate is on that amendment. Yes. Councillor Ibai?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think a committee is a little bit, we're a little too soon on a committee. I think a review of the policy is a good start, and then it can come back to us. I think originally that's what Councillor McIntosh said, a committee, but then changed his mind, just a review, and now we're adding another committee. I just think if we just get a review of the policy, get it back, and then if we decide a committee is necessary, you know, if the new policy doesn't require a committee, then, you know, I feel like we're adding a lot of committees. Just a thought.
Madam Clerk?
Yeah, I'm
Perhaps I'm
wrong.
the one who misunderstood. I thought Councillor Grant was asking this committee to review the policy as a group before it came to council. Did I understand
Yeah,
correctly?
we didn't identify who was going to do it. Somebody's going to review it. I'm just suggesting that it be the current committee review it.
So the current committee will review the policy itself before it comes to council. It does not speak to looking at the names.
Okay, got it.
So that's a motion to amend. That was seconded by Councillor Gardner. So the debate is on the motion to amend. I've just heard Councillor Ibai. Councillor Townsend.
Point of order, Madam Mayor. Doesn't the mover of the original motion have to agree to the amendment?
Madam Clerk.
No.
Only a friendly amendment.
Yeah.
This is an
Awesome.
amendment with its own motion. That will be voted on separately, and then we go back to the original.
Correct.
motion.
So we're debating the motion to amend.
Okay.
Councillor Townsend.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Mm-hmm.
Can you, sorry, through you, can you remind us who's on this committee currently? The existing committee?
Madam Clerk.
Jeff Clark is on. Mark Buello is on. Bill DeWitt would be on. The CAO would be on. And for this one was the mayor. That can change. So it's either the department heads or a designate.
Okay. So the current composition has the mayor representing council. So, in my opinion, I think there should be more council representation on that committee. So I will not vote in favor of this amendment at this time. And that's my reason for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Who else wants to debate the motion to amend? So I call a vote. Oh, Councillor Mack?
Well, the amendment, as I understand it, the committee that we currently exist is going to look at this, review this. And come back to council with, hey, you got to really redo this over again. Okay. I don't have that same, okay, that's, I have no problem with that. My original motion referred to administration. This is administration plus you. So it's, I'm okay with the amendment, as long as we get a report back from, and it's coming from administration, rather, so.
Any further debate on the motion to amend? So I'm going to vote against that. I agree with Councillor Towndale. I don't think we need to go through this committee as it is here. So I'm going to not support that. So I'm calling the vote on the motion to amend. All in favor? Two. Against? That fails. So we're back to the motion made by Councillor McIntosh. Any further debate on that motion? All in favor? Against? Carried.
Medical loan agreement 2019 for Ryan Hartley, with a recommendation that council approve Ryan Hartley as the 2019 Medical Scholarship Program recipient.
Councillor Hébert, you make a motion?
Yeah, sure.
Seconded by Councillor Elaine McDonald. Any further discussion?
Quick question.
Questions? Councillor Mack.
This, I noticed in the bylaws, we have a couple of doctors who are getting money to set up practices in Cornwall. One's a surgeon, one's an ophthalmologist, I believe. Isn't this the same thing?
Mr. Waller?
Through you, Madam Mayor.
He's
this-
finished school.
Well, this is, all of the others are established
Mhm.
medical
Yeah.
practitioners. This is a student who,
I have no problem with that. Great,
Yeah.
bring them on.
yeah, and in fact, quite honestly, part of the problem with attracting medical students through the scholarship is that oftentimes, in fact, every other time, they're in the very early stages and aren't really quite sure whether they want to be family practitioners or specialists, et cetera. We have a situation here where next year this time,
Yeah.
this person will be qualified as a family practitioner, and so I really think that it's a favorable
Oh,
situation.
I have no,
Right.
but the recruitment team,
The
how
recruitment
do
team-
we latch on to this doctor?
Typically, so there's a committee that tries to work at recruiting. The hospital is involved in that. And their job is to try to find the needs of the community, and so they're identified here.
Yeah.
In other words, if we don't need a psychiatrist or a ophthalmologist, they're not looking for those types of people.
Yeah. What I like about this too, he did his medical training in Kingston. He's now in Belleville, and he picks Cornwall.
Right.
Perhaps maybe because he's from Montreal, but he could have picked Kingston, he could have picked Belleville, but he decided to Cornwall. That's
And
good.
he has family in SDNG as well.
Oh, does he?
Yes.
Oh,
Is that
great.
why he chose Cornwall?
I believe so, yes. His parents live in this
Is
region.
that right? You won't have to go looking for patients, that's
No.
for sure.
No. That's good news. Any further discussion on this? All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Moving on to tenders, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Tender 19T56, Water Purification Plant Capital Projects, recommending that this tender be awarded to Eastern Welding from Somerstown at the total bid price of $1,127,180.65.
Moved by Councillor Hébert, seconded by Councillor Grant. All in favor? Carried.
Tender 19T57, Tree Stumping, recommending that this tender be awarded to Green Acres Snow Removal from Cornwall at the total bid price of $40,567.
Moved by Councillor Dupel, seconded by Councillor Towndale. Any debate? All in favor? Carried.
Tender 19T59, Snow Clearing and Ice Control, various departments. That this tender be awarded for one winter season, 2019-2020, with the option to renew for one additional year to Green Acres Snow Removal from Cornwall for bids A, B, C, and D.
Moved by Councillor Gardner, seconded by Councillor Bennett. Any questions? All in favor? Carried.
Tender 19T60, Fall Supply, Delivery and Unloading of various caliper potted trees. Action recommended is that this tender be awarded to Pépinière Kramer Nursery Incorporated from Nicèdre, Quebec, at the total bid price of $32,390.32.
Moved by Councillor Dupel, seconded by Councillor Elaine McDonald. All in favor? Carried.
I have no new business motions, Madam Mayor.
Okay.
Passing of the bylaws, that bylaws 2019-102 to 113 inclusive, listed on the agenda, be taken as read and passed.
Moved by Councillor Bennett, seconded by, come on, people, Councillor Hébert. All in favor? Carried. We're almost there.
Which brings us to reports from standing special committees of council, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Elaine McDonald. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I just want to say that we have so many employees who work tirelessly and excellently and not looking for anything beyond their recompense that they get with their jobs. But I want to single out one woman who has done excellent work
within our Ontario Works program. In fact, she's an eligibility review officer, and she's attending a conference soon on eligibility review. And she is going to be the first person to receive an award for the innovation she's brought to her task. And another employee of ours from Cornwall is going to be actually giving a workshop at the conference coming up where Jocelyn Menard is going to be getting an award. And the second person who's actually giving one of the workshops is Kendra Lalonde. And I think our people in Ontario work so much in the, in the shadows. And I think this is two women who've done some wonderful work and should be publicly commended. Thank you.
Thank you, and maybe Ms. Ferguson could speak to that at the next meeting as well. That might be a good idea as well. Thank you, Councillor Elaine McDonald. Any other reports? Madam Clerk?
Notices of motion, I have one of those as well.
Okay.
Unfinished business listing, that council received the unfinished business listing for September 9th, 2019.
Moved by Councillor Rubin, seconded by Councillor Gardner. All in favor? Oh, question?
Brief
Councillor
comment. I'm just noticing that the creation of an Environment and Climate Change Committee has been pushed to October 15th. I believe a couple of months ago we talked about seeing that at the first meeting in September. I'm acknowledging we've had a lot going on. And it's fine that it's been pushed a month. I'm just really hoping that that's as far as it gets pushed.
Right, so my understanding is that that's a firm date, okay?
Excellent.
It
That
is
is fine.
10 after 10.
Yeah.
We have massive agendas, and many of these agendas are driven by either legislative requirements or council requirements. I'm really looking forward to our discussion around the procedural bylaw in terms of, how we're going to organize debate, and maybe have shorter discussion times. So councillors, right now our procedural bylaw speaks to 3 minutes, right? Yeah, we've been using way more than that.
Oh, yeah.
So if we're going to be an active council, which we are, if we're gonna move issues and all kinds of issues forward and create task forces and committees, well, we're gonna need to have some control around the agenda and how we're speaking to our points. So the discussion on the procedural bylaw is on for November, I think, Madam CAO. So I'm looking forward to that discussion amongst ourselves. But the October 15th date, my understanding is that it's firm.
good.
Any other comments
I'm
concerning the
happy.
unfinished business list? All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
The confirming bylaw is that the bylaw 114 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council of the City of Cornwall at its meeting held on Monday, September 9th, having been read, be now taken and passed.
Moved by Councillor DePel, Councillor Towndale. All in favor? Before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I'd like to point out that there's a new member of the management team in the room. Madam CAO, can you introduce him, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So with us this evening, we have Mr. Stephen Golden. Stephen joins us as the new administrator for the Glenstoran Lodge. He started with us a couple of weeks ago. Mr. Kenville retired at the end of August. So we're very happy to have Stephen as part of our team. Stephen comes to us with quite a variety of background experience in long-term care and working with homes for the aged. So we're welcoming him aboard to our team, and we look forward to having him join us in the months ahead. So welcome, Stephen.
Welcome, Mr. Golden. He tells me this is the first council meeting he has ever attended ever in his life.
Did he enjoy
I don't know what those are.
Pretty exciting, eh?
Congratulations. Sorry. Yeah.
Thought she'd get home in reasonable time.
All right, motion to adjourn. Councillor Gardner, Councillor McDonald, all in favor? Thank you for your patience, everyone. Merci.
Wash your hands, well. Yeah. True story.
Not wasting time on